Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto Uzumaki, known as the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, is born female. Part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. It was spring in the land of fire, and it showed with the cherry blossoms falling down through the village of Konoha. It was a rarity that the trees bloomed, even in such nice weather, but it was a pleasant occurrence, so no one could complain. Well, there was one person who could. That person was Naruto Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi and upcoming kunoichi of Konoha. The girl was widely known among the villagers for both her prisoner and her looks, but not so much her skills. Her looks were a thing of envy among most of her fellow academy students, even if she ruined them by wearing a bright orange jumpsuit all the time. Her bright blonde hair and blue eyes more than made up for her choice in wardrobe, and currently her hair was tied back in a loose ponytail, reaching past her shoulder blades. Normally it was in two loose pigtails, but today she needed her bangs out of her face, and the dark green goggles she normally wore were unfit to the task, leaving them dangling around her neck. With a sigh, Naruto pulled up her broom from its resting place on the roof of her large apartment complex and began to sweep away the cherry blossoms that had drifted onto her home. Normally this would fall to the landlord to do, but the man had passed away from old age 2 years ago, leaving no one to the task. Also, while Naruto was not privy to the reason, she was currently the only one that lived in the complex, despite it having 8 separate apartments built into it, and 1 extra room that the landlord had originally lived in. With the landlord gone, and no one willing to move in to own the place, Sarutobi Hiruzen, the 3rd Hokage, decided to give all rights to the building to one Uzumaki Naruto. This meant she had to take care of it, but until she received a steady income, the Hokage had stated he would take care of all payments, so long as she took care of the building, which she did every day by cleaning up messes people would leave nearby, either on purpose or accident, though she was unable to tell the difference, and replacing tiles on the roof when the rain wore them down. Another example was when the floor in one room, one she did not even go into regularly, completely fell through and she repaired it. It was a patch job, of course, but through events like that the blonde slowly grew in skill when it came to repairing, though getting the supplies needed was a task on its own. The building was a large brown building near the edge of Konoha's living area. It was rectangle in shape with a curved triangle roof, and there were 5 doors on the bottom half of the building. The one on the very far left of the building, if you were staring right at it, was a square shack that was added to the house and thus did not really match the rest of it. In front of that, however, was a set of stairs that led up to the remaining 4 apartments, all carefully measured to be directly above the doors below. All of the apartments were similar, with a small living room, a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small rectangle kitchen. Despite their lack of use, the apartments still caused Naruto a bit of annoyance, as something seemed to go wrong with them here and there. Currently, however, her only task was to clean off the cherry blossoms before she had to go to class and hope that the wind changed direction after she left. Of course, the blonde still had a number of chores to do around the building, such as repairing the large fence in the backyard, but they weren't critical. The academy, however, was critical, and Naruto knew she couldn't be late again. Iruka, a scar-faced Chunin, was a slave driver when it came to attendance. He even went so far as to drag Uchiha Sasuke back to class after he disappeared for a week, much to Sasuke's humiliation, even though Naruto was the only one that knew, and that was only because she had been dragged alongside him. A clacking sound resounded throughout the area as Naruto dropped her broom, letting it slide off the roof and land on the balcony below, soon followed by its handler, who landed beside it with a light step, careful not to land on the tool. "All right," the blonde said aloud, smirking as she hopped down from the balcony and onto the walkway below. "Work's done, time to go to class." With that, she spun on her heel and began to walk down the street with her hands in the pockets of her orange jacket. It wasn't until she reached the more populated area that she pulled her hands free, forming a single seal as she walked. In an instant, the medium-sized blonde with bright blue eyes was replaced by a tall brown-haired man with a gray shirt and silk pants on. The man grinned lazily as he made his way through the crowd that paid him no mind, excluding a vendor that tried to catch his attention to sell him something as he walked past. Naruto had taken a liking to the henge jutsu, and especially this form in particular. The image she wore had a simple expression and body, one you could forget easily. Normally whenever she walked past someone, they would glare at her, but not with this face. She wasn't blind, and it hadn't taken her long to realize they only glared at her, so she created another persona. It was hard to do at first, but she did spend several years in the academy to perfect her jutsu, and Iruka always made sure everyone knew how to do the jutsu before moving on. Speaking of Iruka, the Chunin was currently standing outside the academy with a smile on his face and a collection of his students in front of him. Naruto frowned in confusion at the sight but allowed her henge to drop when no one was looking and made her way into the field. The brown-haired Chunin seemed to notice her approach as he waved at her with a smile. "Welcome, Naruto. You're on time today," the man teased slightly, earning a grin from the kunoichi to be as she stood in the back of the class. Several eyes turned towards her, but she paid them no mind as she grinned at Iruka. "I made sure that black cat didn't cross my path this time." she joked, placing one hand on her hip as she unknowingly took a page from a silver-haired jounin. Iruka simply rolled his eyes in response, causing Naruto to grin further. So what's this all about, Iruka-sensei? A field trip? The last words were said teasingly. Ninja didn't take field trips. Iruka chuckled and shook his head, pulling up a paper that she had not noticed before. I was just getting to that, actually, so pay attention everyone. Clearing his throat, Iruka began to speak while Naruto took a spot beside a certain Hyuga heiress in the small crowd that had formed. Today will be a special training exercise to evaluate where you stand. We'll be testing all of your knowledge to see if you're ready for the exams in 2 weeks. The Chunin explained, though his voice was slightly monotone as he read from the paper in his hand. And if we fail the expectations? One boy asked with a lazy tone to his voice, and Naruto couldn't help but roll her eyes as she glanced at the one who spoke, Shikamaru Nara. Notoriously lazy and, if it wasn't for his extreme brain power, probably the worst when it came to actual tests. He didn't do the minimum, per se, but he didn't do the best he could do either. Iruka gave Shikamaru a small smile, but it seemed like he had expected a question like that. Well, if you're deemed not ready, you might have to be held back, but you'll still have to take the exam later either way. This is more of a test to let you all know where you stand and what you need to improve on in 2 weeks' time. Shikamaru nodded and turned his head towards the clouds, seeming satisfied with the answer. Iruka sighed slightly as he saw this and quickly added, but you have to participate for a grade. That got the Nara groaning, but he didn't say anything. A couple of chuckles went through the crowd and Iruka waved his hands to get their attention back when they subsided. We'll be going through taijutsu first, so I'll be splitting you into partners to spar against one group at a time. No weapons, jutsu, or crippling blows are allowed. There was a series of murmurs among the students, but it was Naruto that raised her hand, a frown on her face. Yes, Naruto, where's Mizuki-sensei? The blonde asked simply, as in previous taijutsu tests they would have Mizuki and Iruka both watch them to cover more than one battle at a time. The fact that he wasn't here explained why they were doing one bout at a time, but it still raised a lot of curiosity, as the white-haired Chunin had yet to miss a day. It seemed the rest of the class shared Naruto's curiosity as their gazes turned towards their sensei expectantly, causing Iruka to sweat slightly from all the eyes on him. This is why I wanted a small class. He thought to himself before answering Naruto's question with a smile. Mizuki has an allergy to a certain plant nearby, so he can't come to class until it's removed. It was a bit of a lie, as Mizuki was actually already affected by the plant, but the students didn't need to know that. Seeing the students satisfied, if not a little confused by his answer, he began to read off the paper once more. The first two up will be Chuji and Naruto. There was a look of surprise on the students' faces, since the bouts were usually gender-based, but Iruka didn't acknowledge them as he walked away towards the fields to the side of the academy. This way, when the students arrived to the field, most of them took to leaning or sitting against the 5 posts that were used for kunai practice while Chuji and Naruto stood in the center of the field with Iruka between them. You may begin when you two are ready. Remember, no crippling blows, weapons, or jutsu are allowed. I'll call the match when it's over. Both nodded and Naruto grinned at the Akimichi, her eyes squinting slightly while she held up the seal of confrontation. Don't hold back, big guy. I won't either. Chuji smiled in return and nodded his head while holding the seal up himself. Sure, Naruto. With that, Naruto rushed towards Chuji and swung a punch at his chest, which he blocked with his left arm. It was rather surprising when Chuji slid back slightly from the blow, since most people couldn't get the Akimichi to move in most spars. The only ones not surprised were the females in the group who had been on the receiving end of Naruto's punches. However, Naruto wasn't done with just one punch and soon began to swiftly punch at the boy, keeping him guarding and sliding back with each punch. Chuji was grunting from the throbbing in his arms and couldn't help but marvel at the girl's strength. It's like she's hitting me with a hammer. He thought to himself before deciding that being completely defensive wasn't going to help him. With a loud grunt he shoved his arms outwards, sending Naruto skidding back with a grin on her face. Not wanting to waste his chance, Chuji quickly closed the small distance and sent a heavy punch towards her midsection. The girl turned to her side, letting it fly past her chest before spinning around, slapping the side of Chuji's head with her right arm. To his credit, Chuji only flinched from the pain and the ringing in his ears before wrapping his arms tightly around the girl, literally squeezing the breath out of her with her back against his chest. Naruto struggled in his grip, but after a moment she just seemed to relax, placing her head back on his shoulder with a lazy grin on her face. My, I didn't know you were so forward, Chuji-kun. She breathed out, causing the boy's grip to lessen as a heavy blush spread across his face. As he began to sputter out denials, Naruto gripped his arms and suddenly slung him over her, getting a glance of his surprised expression before he hit the ground with a oof. Naruto grinned down at him, her hands on her hips and her ponytail sliding over her shoulder. Got you. The blonde teased, just as Iruka walked up to them with an amused smile on his face. Good work, both of you. I'm sure you could go on longer, but we're pressed for time. The Chunin explained and Naruto nodded, stepping to Chuji's side and helping the boy to his feet. The two held up the seal of reconciliation as their battle ended. Chuji, still blushing, made his way towards his friend Shikamaru, who gave the larger boy a flat look. "I can't believe you fell for that," he deadpanned, though years of being his friend allowed Chuji to see the boy was amused. "I couldn't help it," the Akimichi meekly replied, glancing at Naruto, who hopped on top of one of the wooden posts. She seemed to notice his look and gave him a grin, which caused his face to turn a brighter shade of red before looking away. Shikamaru, noticing the exchange, just snorted slightly. "Well, you best get used to it. Women do that a lot. Troublesome." It was the Akimichi's turn to snort, though he had a teasing smile on his face despite his current embarrassment. "Like you would have fared any better, Shikamaru," he lightly teased, as the Nara boy seemed to have a weakness when it came to women. He didn't do much work unless one of the female classmates yelled at him to get his ass in gear. Shikamaru chose not to respond. On Naruto's side, Ino rolled her eyes as the blonde grinned at Chuji while Hinata and Sakura made their way to the center of the field. "Geez, Goldie, what was that about?" the Yamanaka asked with a trace of annoyance in her voice while she used her pet name for Naruto. Hinata, Naruto, Ino, and Sakura were all friends, with Sakura and Ino reaching out towards the Sasuke fan club, while the other two didn't speak to anyone else for the most part. Ino had met the girl years before in the playground and the two quickly became friends, even though Ino's father had seemed nervous during the first few months, but he seemed to get over it. After that, the two met Sakura and protected her from a group of bullies who were tormenting her. Hinata was another matter entirely, but it seemed like Naruto protected her from two boys that were picking on the shy heiress, and the Hyuga looked up to Naruto ever since, though she did seem to blush a lot whenever she spoke to the blonde. At Ino's words, Naruto turned her gaze down towards her longtime friend and grinned further, showing off her sharp teeth. "Nothing, really. I learned it from a kunoichi in the hot springs. She said everything is a weapon, especially a woman's body." Ino rolled her eyes again but didn't respond, deciding a simple shake of the head was all that was needed. In truth, Naruto had only learned it in passing, and the kunoichi in question probably didn't even realize an academy student took her advice. Naruto just happened to be in the hot springs, under a henge of a much older woman, when a kunoichi was explaining something to a new brown-haired genin. "You're good at throwing kunai, but remember everything is a weapon." She heard the kunoichi explain, though Naruto couldn't make out any features through the steam of the hot springs. "Like your body, for instance. If you throw that around like a kunai, there's no telling how many kills you'd get." The genin didn't seem to enjoy that, and it was evident in her voice. "Sensei, that sounds a little whorish." There was a bark of laughter from the older kunoichi, but it quickly fell into small giggles before the kunoichi was able to respond. "That's why you have to be in control. Control is key. Throw it around, but only let them touch what you want them to touch. See what you want them to see." A little husky voice comment here and there can throw someone's concentration off. Seduction is a key principle to being a kunoichi, so get used to it. Naruto had taken her words to heart, especially the control aspect. "So many things are out of my control," the blonde thought to herself as she watched Hinata dodge a punch from Sakura and counter-attack with a palm thrust. "So I'll control everything," she vowed in her mind, just as Iruka called the match when Sakura barely got back on her feet. The rest of the tests went on very normally, and other than the Chuji/Naruto match there were no more matches against the opposite gender. Ino fought a redhead named Ami on a rather even level, but Ino ended up being the victor. Sasuke fought Kiba to a stalemate, though with both using the academy style instead of their clan styles, it was hard to see who was better. Shikamaru and Shino went against each other last, but without either using their clan specialty, it resulted in a rather long match with the two playing their wits against each other. In the end, Shino won by feinting a kick for the first time and sending Shikamaru skidding across the ground. "That's enough," Iruka called out, writing something down on the paper as Shino helped Shikamaru to his feet. "You fought well, but relied too much on me staying in the academy style," Shino quietly stated, earning a nod from the Nara as he rubbed his shoulder. "Yeah, though I never beat you with those bugs of yours. Can't hold all of them in you." It was true, but Shino just raised his eyebrows slightly. "I'm sure you could have worked around it." "Too troublesome," was the curt reply, earning a small chuckle from Naruto, who had hopped over towards them. The blonde grinned at them as they turned their heads towards her as her arms draped around them, startling Shino more than Shikamaru since no one usually got near him outside of a spar. "Nice fight, you guys. I knew you had it in you, Shika," the blonde teased, sticking her tongue out at the pineapple-headed genius who just rolled his eyes. "I don't want to be the dead last. That would be way too troublesome." Naruto blinked in confusion at the odd reply and allowed the Nara to walk away towards Chuji. The blonde turned a questioning gaze towards Shino, not bothering to move her arm that was still draped across his shoulders. Shino sighed, squirming slightly as he began to answer her unspoken question. "He says this because the dead last will be placed on the Rookie of the Year, male and female." "Why, you ask?" "To help balance the team's strength." Naruto frowned, pulling her arm away as she crossed it in front of her chest, her eyebrows knitting together in confusion. "What?" "That's stupid." Shino arched his own eyebrows slightly, placing his hands into his pockets as Naruto spoke. "Why would they do that? I mean, shouldn't they take our personal skills and attitudes for account?" Sakura is going to be the rookie of the year because of her brain, but. She fell silent, but Shino knew what she was going to say. Though Naruto was Sakura's friend, even she had to admit the girl was awful at taijutsu. She was decent with her aim and her ninjutsu was passable, but she had an awful attitude, even though her friendship with Naruto, Ino, and Hinata had mellowed her out quite a bit. There was no doubt she'd be placed on Sasuke's team as well, since he was the strongest male, which would only further her infatuation with the last Uchiha. Shino shook his head slightly and sighed in a rare show of emotion as confusion etched itself on his face, though few would recognize the look. I don't know. Perhaps it is so the sensei can focus more on the dead last? It was merely a theory, but by the looks of it Naruto didn't accept that answer. I'll have to talk to Gigi about this, she muttered to herself, not noticing Shino's eyebrows raise again before falling back down as she looked up at him. Thanks though, Shino. And good fight, maybe we should spar sometime. She grinned happily and began to walk away with Shino staring at her back. He was tempted to follow her, but Iruka stepped in his way and called the attention of the rest of the class. When they were all gathered in front of him, Iruka glanced to the sky before nodding and looking down at them. Alright, that took longer than expected, and it's nearly lunchtime, so you're all dismissed. I have to report to Hokage-sama, so you all may go home early today. There was a whoop from Kiba and several others, though the Chunin noticed Naruto's frown and he repressed one of his own. They could go home, but Naruto didn't have a home to go back to, did she? That sent a faint wave of depression through him, but he kept his smile on his face as the students began to walk away. He was rather surprised when Naruto stood in front of him, her hands on her hips in that defiant manner she usually only did when she was serious. This can't be good. As if she was privy to his thoughts, Naruto's eyes narrowed and she pointed up at the Chunin, as if accusing him of something. Take me with you to see Gigi. I need to talk to him about team placements. Iruka blinked in confusion and arched his eyebrows slightly. About the team placements? What about? His question was just met with a shake of the head as the blonde lowered her hand. I don't want to repeat myself, so just take me there, sensei. Gigi won't mind. Iruka wasn't sure about that, but he supposed there was no harm in it. With a sigh, he nodded his head, causing the blonde to break out in a grin. But can it wait until after I give my report? Naruto shrugged and the two headed for the Hokage Tower. Hokage-sama will see you now, Iruka-san, Mizuki-san, said the ever-cheerful secretary of the Hokage. The two Chunin, one brown-haired and the other white, nodded and rose from their seats in the room, walking into the Hokage's office soon after. The owner of that office, Hiruzen Sarutobi, looked up with a smile on his face as the two Chunin entered the room. Welcome, Iruka-san, Mizuki. The last word fell into a confused tone as the white-haired Chunin closed the door behind him. Hadn't the Chunin taken the day off because of his allergies? Hiruzen's unspoken question was answered when the Chunin disappeared in a poof, only to be replaced by a blonde that he had grown to love. Naruto-chan, what are you doing disguising as a Chunin? The god of shinobi asked with an amused tone, politely putting his pipe away since he had company. Naruto just shrugged and sat down in one of the seats that were always present in front of the Hokage's desk. He had a lot of visitors, after all. That woman doesn't like me and I wanted to show Iruka-sensei my henge. Iruka chuckled, taking his own seat while Sarutobi raised his eyebrows. I had thought you went through a ninjutsu test today? The old man questioned with a faint frown on his face. We ran out of time. The taijutsu test took longer than I thought it would, even though I cut Chuji's and Naruto's match short. Iruka explained, silently hoping his leader wasn't too upset. Fortunately, Naruto chose that moment to speak up with a loud whine. What? I thought it was weird. Darn it, Iruka-sensei. I wanted to fight more. Both of the older shinobi chuckled at her childish tone, though it was Hiruzen who responded to the distraught girl. I'm sure Chuji-kun wouldn't mind sparring with you sometime, Naruto-chan. Now Iruka, what do you have to report? He was also curious why Naruto was here, but he was sure the girl would tell him eventually, even if he didn't ask. Iruka nodded, pulling up the paper he had written on earlier and beginning to read off it, taking a moment to stand up to be more respectful to the Hokage. We only did the taijutsu test today, but I'd say there are only a few students that won't pass that portion of the test. The only one I can see improving to fix that is Sakura Harino, since she is nearly on par with Eino Yamanaka, who gets right over the score needed. Naruto frowned, thinking back to her pink-haired friend who denied training her body more in order to chase after Sasuke. While Naruto had managed to keep Ino and Sakura from hating each other, mostly by slamming her hands down loudly whenever they began to argue over him, she wasn't able to break the obsession. Ino was slightly better than Sakura because of her father forcing her to train a minimum amount every day, but Hinata and Naruto both trained constantly and it showed. So lost in thought, Naruto completely missed Iruka's telling of the other students that probably wouldn't pass, but didn't miss his report on her specifically. Naruto here got a high grade in the taijutsu test. Her movements are a little sloppy and she overcommitted in one attack, but she manipulated her opponent when she was at a disadvantage. Hiruzen chuckled softly at Iruka's report, while a grin split across Naruto's face. Didn't see it coming. she proudly stated, still grinning wide. It wasn't something I expected either from you, Naruto. Iruka admitted, smiling himself. Reminded me a bit of Anko, actually. He kept that thought to himself as he looked towards the Hokage with a proud smile on his face. She's also really good at the henge. She even got a few of Mizuki's habits down. Naruto blushed slightly from the praise, scratching her cheek. I just noticed he taps his foot a lot when he's waiting on something. Usually for Iruka, admittedly, but she had noticed he'd tap his foot whenever someone was delivering something to him too. There was no point in being him without knowing some of his habits, and seeing Mizuki out with Iruka raised the least amount of suspicion when they were walking down the street. Hiruzen seemed to realize this as well as he gave her an appraising look. Very good, Naruto-chan. It's impressive that you would consider all of that. Iruka gave him a slightly confused look while Naruto blushed more under the praise, lowering her head slightly to hide her face in her jacket. Iruka chuckled slightly at her actions and nodded in agreement as he realized what changing into Mizuki had really done for the blonde. If it wasn't for her history tests and the Bunshin, she'd probably be Rookie of the Year. Iruka stated proudly, but at the mention of the rookie, Naruto perked up and stared at the Hokage with wide eyes. Oh yeah. I was going to talk to you about that. She couldn't believe she nearly forgot. Darn, Iruka-sensei getting her distracted. Shaking her head to clear her thoughts, the blonde Jinchuriki pointed dramatically at the man she called Grandpa. The Rookie of the Year thing is stupid. Don't put teams together like that. Silence followed her statement, and if one listened closely, they could only hear a faint snicker of a hidden ANBU nearby. Iruka paled and Hiruzen stared at Naruto with an amused smile on his face. Naruto's face was slowly getting redder from embarrassment, but her eyes stayed determined and she continued to point at him. It was a few more moments before he responded, a curious and amused tone in his voice. And why is that, Naruto-chan? He was honestly curious. It was the first time anyone had ever questioned the way the academy worked ever since he took up the mantle of Hokage. The fact that it was coming from an academy student was rather amusing. Naruto put her hands on her hips and the expression on her face gave away that she was anything but amused. You're not taking their actual skills into consideration, she proclaimed and was secretly patting herself on the back for reading the collection of books the old landlord left behind. A dictionary was a wonderful thing for her limited vocabulary. Iruka-sensei said himself that I'm really good, but my book smarts aren't, so that's why I'm not rookie. But Sakura is getting rookie on that alone. Now Naruto, just because you're not getting rookie because of that doesn't mean. Naruto snapped her fingers, interrupting Iruka in a rather rude fashion that had him gaping in surprise. Not what I was saying. I'm saying she's super weak and she's going to get paired with Uchiha. There was no way to keep the venom out of her voice from saying the name Uchiha. He had, without even trying, crippled her friends. Plus he was a total dick. She's got a fangirl crush on him, and that's gonna make her even weaker. The blonde explained and Iruka groaned silently, glancing towards the Hokage for assistance. The Hokage, however, simply stared at the blonde with a thoughtful look on his face. He stroked his beard for a moment before speaking up. And how would you place the teams, Naruto-chan? Naruto blinked in surprise, having not thought he'd let her, of all people, say her opinion. Even if he did seem to like her a lot, and he was her Gigi, no one ever listened to her. It was nice, but back to the point. Naruto rubbed her chin thoughtfully as she considered the Hokage's question. I don't know all the students in my class personally, she admitted, starting to pace back and forth in front of the two. But I'd say, from the people I do know, I'd probably put Sakura and Ino far away from Sasuke. She tapped her foot twice and sat down, crossing her arms together. Kiba should be with Sasuke, they seem to like each other. Maybe put Shino with them for planning, he's really smart. She leaned back, humming to herself. Shikamaru needs someone that can push him, so probably put him with Ino or Sakura, maybe both. She grinned at the image of a dismayed Shikamaru being paired up with Ino and Sakura, but she shook her head to clear the thoughts. But they probably fight each other, so maybe not. Hinata is really good at taijutsu, but she's kind of meek, so she wouldn't do well with Shika. Chuji can't be with Shika since he'd let his friend relax too much. The blonde hummed quietly. But Shika also needs a distraction and Sakura is pretty good at control things. I think she could use genjutsu, right? She didn't even look up to see Iruka's thoughtful nod. I dunno though, but you should take that instead of the rookie thing. That's just silly. I mean, why put Sakura up with the heavy hitters? She needs someone to push her. I only wish I could have. The blonde thought silently but raised her head from its dangling position to look at Hiruzen. The Hokage was thoughtfully rubbing his beard, a small smile on his face. I can see you put some thought into this, Naruto-chan. I'll consider it, but you have to understand that tradition isn't something that can be undone easily. Naruto blinked olishly at him and tilted her head to the side, frowning. Traditionally, I don't like my friends being hurt because some old guy said to do something a certain way. Iruka palmed his face while Hiruzen chuckled slightly. I wasn't under the impression I was that old, Naruto-chan. The Hokage teased, causing the blonde to blush in embarrassment. I didn't mean you. I meant, the guy who set that up. That was me. What? She blinked and frowned further, scrunching her nose up in an adorable fashion. But doesn't that mean it's not tradition? No one did it before you told them to. Hiruzen blinked and then nodded slowly, chuckling. I suppose it wasn't always tradition. At any rate though, Naruto-chan, Irika, I have a meeting soon. It was nice talking to you too, and I will consider your words, Naruto-chan. Naruto nodded and smiled, hopping to the side of the desk and wrapping her arms around the old Hokage before joining Irika at the door. Irika bowed politely and started to open the door just as Naruto turned back into Mizuki with a small puff of smoke. See you later, Gigi. The man cried out childishly, which got him a strange look from the secretary and a chuckle from the old Hokage and Irika. When they left, Hiruzen slowly reached under his desk and pulled out a familiar orange book. Time for my meeting, he thought with a grin. Naruto hummed to herself as she slammed her hammer down on a stubborn nail, pushing it further into the surface of her wooden balcony. When she was finished, she stepped back to examine her work, nodding to herself as she saw the piece that had come loose was back in place. She had instantly gone to work when she returned home, thankful that the wind had changed and blown all the cherry blossoms off her roof. They were now scattered across her backyard, but that was fine. The roof was more noticeable, so it was the primary problem. Now she was officially done with her chores, but it was only midday. Train or prank? She thought to herself as she pulled her goggles up from her neck, letting them cover her eyes as she grinned. Why not both? It wasn't a known fact that Naruto was an infamous prankster, only because no one could prove it was her. With a mixture of henge and her own stealth techniques, Naruto was a constant form of amusement for many shinobi, until they were the target. And today, Naruto picked a hard target to test her limits and, more importantly, improve her skills. Everything is training, she thought as she hopped down from the balcony with a smirk on her face as she recited a line she read in one of the landlord's private manga stash. It was actually his nephew's stash, but when he died on a mission the landlord took them for himself as a reminder. The manga had been rather weird, but interesting and very combat-heavy. She intended to implement the training the main character did into her own style, but she had not made it far enough to really get to the training parts. But she had taken the main character's words to heart. Everything is training. So, with that in mind, she made her way towards the Hokage Tower. Her target, however, was not the Hokage Tower itself, but the building beside it that was secretly known as the Torture and Interrogation Force, or TNI for short. The building itself wasn't actually the source of where any actions of the TNI took place, but a gateway to it. The only way through it was a series of checkpoints, but there was no way Naruto could get past them. She knew she wasn't that good. The only reason she knew about it in the first place was because of the rare times she was brought down into the area, usually in her younger days, during her birthday. Those times had stopped years ago, but the memory of being given a cake by the Hokage was something that stuck out in her mind. But she didn't need to get in there per se. She just needed to make sure no one got in there with their hands clean, so to speak. With that in mind, and a grin on her face, Naruto transformed into her forgettable body double and walked down the street beside the building with his hands stuffed into his gray pockets. Right as he turned the corner, he ducked down and transformed again, changing into a black-suited female that she based off the silhouette of the kunoichi she had gotten advice from in the hot springs. Her body was completely covered in black cloth, other than her eyes and nose, but was well endowed and had bright yellow eyes that were covered by a pair of black goggles to block out any unwanted light. She kept to the shadows of the building as she approached, though her taller body had to bend slightly to avoid the window on the side. Carefully, she made her way around while keeping her ears pricked for any sound from inside. There was only a faint tapping sound, like a pencil hitting a desk. Board secretary, maybe? She'd have to do some heavy stealth for this one. And by heavy stealth, she meant completely breaking the laws of stealth by being as obvious as possible. With a swift movement, the girl kicked a nearby rock into the air and then grabbed it, tossing it straight through the window, which was open, before slipping to the side to avoid detection. There was a loud crash and a scream of what the hell, before a purple-haired kunoichi slammed the door open and growled, looking back and forth. Damn brats. That's it, I'm done with this. Ibiki can kiss my ass. The woman growled out, her gray trench coat nearly hitting Naruto in the face as she slid across the ground beside the woman. Thankfully, the purple-haired woman was far too annoyed to even notice the person invading the building, and Naruto slipped inside without interference. Naruto sighed to herself as she noted the broken flower pot with a rock in it, the same one she had thrown, and that the building looked oddly tame for a place where torture victims went through. There was a single desk, 2 doors, one being wide open since she just came through it, and 3 windows. What Naruto instantly noted was the vent above the desk, and she hopped onto the desk, staring up at the vent. In a flash, she pulled out an all-purpose screwdriver that she usually used to fix her house and began to unscrew the grate. She caught it before it fell and hopped through the vent, transforming back to normal as she did so. She pulled the covering up and pulled it back in place, though she knew it would only be a matter of time before it fell again, but hopefully it would be long enough. With her time frame in mind, she hastily made her way through the vent. When the vent began to ramp downwards, Naruto was forced to slide down on her stomach, but she kept her movements slow, making as little noise as possible. She grinned as she began to hear voices, but it was only when she reached the next grate that she could make them out completely, and she stared down as she heard a harsh voice yell, "Tell me what you know!" It was a man, that was obvious, with a large black overcoat and a black cap resting on his head. She knew him by Ibiki? He had talked to her once, during her 5th birthday, but she couldn't remember what was said. He was speaking to another man this time, but she couldn't make out the features, just a mop of brown hair that seemed to have dried blood in it. Naruto wrinkled her nose in disgust from the smell but watched as the man whimpered, clearly in pain. "Still not talking?" Ibiki sounded curious, if not confused, of the man's lack of response. "Very well. We have all night, after all. No need to rush things." With that, he took out a kunai, but even from her distance Naruto could see a flash of green reflect off of it. Poison. Her mind supplied, just as Ibiki made a move to cut the man on his arm. He seemed to know it was poisoned as well, because he suddenly started to scream. No! Anything but that. Not again. Please! I'll talk. He had been through it before? So it wasn't deadly poison. Naruto tucked that information aside as she watched in fascination as Ibiki took a small step back away from the man, enough to keep the poison from dripping on him but not enough for Ibiki to not reach him. "Speak." It was a command and the man readily obeyed. I was from. He paused, gulping something down. No. I can't. Please, I can't. The man pleaded, but his only response was a sigh from the tall man. "I asked you politely, you refused. I asked you harshly, you refused. My patience is running thin. You have 5 seconds. Please, I can't. 4. They'd kill me for sure, and I won't. 2. But you were just at 4. 1. That was the last straw, but just as the man was about to cry out, his voice was cut short as it erupted in a painful scream when Ibiki drew the knife across his cheek. Naruto put her hands over her mouth as she saw the man start to violently convulse on the ground, and she gulped down the bile that was beginning to gather. Throwing up on him would reveal her location. "Force it down. Move," she commanded herself, controlled her own body, to move forward slowly. The man's screams were the only thing that kept her own heavy breath from being heard, and when they finally died down she let her head rest on her hands. This was what ninja did. She could see why they were feared, but at the same time, did she really want to be part of that? To be part of a ruthless machine of killers and torturers? She hadn't really thought about it, she just went along with what the Hokage suggested. Did she want to be like Ibiki? He was so scary. She thought to herself, biting her lip. Could she be like that? Did she want to be? The Hokage wasn't scary, but she never saw him against an enemy. Was he scary too? Did she want to torture people like that and become scary? But he was in control. A voice purred in her head like a cat, causing Naruto to stiffen up with wide eyes. He handled that entirely. Beginning to end, he was in control. He knew the man wouldn't talk, but he needed to establish that he wouldn't forgive him if he didn't get the information. Don't you want to control information? What would Naruto do if she was in control? Find out why people hated her. Figure out the best way to become a ninja? Torture people to get what she wanted, for the people she cared about. No time, another voice snapped, breaking into her thoughts. We're on a mission. Think later, act now. Nodding to herself, Naruto pushed her body forward, ignoring the bit of tears going down her cheeks as she made her way through the vent. It was a few moments later that she found what she was looking for, a hidden locker room meant for the NBU, both TNI and normal, to use for their equipment. Grinning to herself, Naruto slowly undid the bolts holding the grate in place and moved it to the side, being as quiet as possible. After it was clear, she hopped down into the room, knowing that it was clear from the lack of heartbeat. While she wasn't sure where her keen hearing came from, she did know she could hear heartbeats of the NBU, even if they were trying to be very quiet. With none in the room, she clapped her hands together with a grin and pulled out a small scroll from the inside of her jacket. She unrolled it and then pushed on the seal written inside, pulling out several bottles and a lockpick kit which she opened first, putting the bottles to the side. She clicked the lockpicks together and smiled as she made her way to the lockers with her plan in mind. It was 10 minutes later when she began to pack up her belongings, sighing to herself. That took longer than expected. She thought to herself as she turned to close the last locker. She paused as she heard the tapping of feet coming from outside the door, and she hastily shoved herself into the locker, using a broken pick, which she had intended to throw away, to block the lock so she didn't get trapped. The door opened right as the locker closed, showing two ANBU with a cat and tiger-themed mask walking into the room. Both were obviously female, and this was made even more apparent when they suddenly removed their cloaks, revealing their naked bodies underneath. Naruto's jaw dropped, but she hastily put her hands over her mouth as she watched the two pull off their masks, revealing a purple-haired woman, though different from the one she saw earlier, and a black-haired one staring at each other. I can't believe I agreed to that dare. That was embarrassing. The purple-haired woman stated in annoyance with a blush on her cheeks as she began to open up a locker that was thankfully not the one Naruto was in. The black-haired woman just laughed, a grin on her face. Oh hush, Yugao. You got some appreciative looks when the wind hit. Naruto couldn't see Yugao's face anymore, but the black-haired woman was getting into the locker beside Naruto's, which caused the blonde to duck just in case she was seen. Yugao growled slightly and Naruto heard the slamming of a locker. "Shut it, Mizumi. I don't want to hear that from you." There was a bark of laughter and the sound of another locker closing before Mizumi began to speak again and Naruto dared to look up. "You always say that, but I know you liked it. It's over anyways, so let's get dressed and get back to work." Yugao grumbled something and Naruto felt her cheeks heat up as the two began to dress in front of her, though they had no way of knowing that. After all, who looked in a locker? As if hearing Naruto's thoughts, Mizumi suddenly stiffened up and looked behind her towards Naruto. Naruto felt her heart beating faster as the woman walked closer, only to bend over before reaching the locker to grab at something on the ground. "What's this bottle?" she asked as she stood up straight, holding a black bottle up for Yugao to see. "It just says 235 on it." Yugao just shrugged, not even pausing in her actions as she pulled a vest on. "I don't know. Maybe it's one of Tori's hair things? You know how she is about her hair." Mizumi hummed and shrugged, tossing the bottle to the side and beginning to pull her clothes on. When they were done, both of them put their masks and cloaks back on before leaving the room, talking quietly amongst themselves. Naruto sighed in relief and pushed the locker open, quickly closing it soon after and grabbing the discarded bottle that she left behind. After that, she jumped upwards and grabbed the rim of the open vent, climbing inside and quickly closing and replacing the bolts on the grill. With a grin on her face, Naruto made her way outside. It was hours later until the Jinchuriki's prank was revealed and another 20 minutes when the affected ANBU and Ibiki were gathered inside the Hokage's office. Kakashi, who had been giving a business report when the ANBU rushed in, was also present and was currently standing to the Hokage's side with a blank look on his face. Had anyone bothered to learn his facial expression, they would know that he was trying very hard not to laugh. The Hokage, however, had no problems with laughing. It was unnerving to see the old man laugh so loudly, but it was probably justified. It wasn't every day that the most feared organization in Konoha ran into his office wearing a varying series of colored cloaks. Pink with purple swirls, blue clouds and red stripes. Some even had pictures on them, bright pink pictures, of the female body. But only for a few select males of the ANBU, though there was one female that had the picture as well. Their masks were thankfully untouched. They were hard to replace after all, but it didn't matter in the end. They were humiliated either way and it showed in the dejected way they held themselves, excepting for Cat and Tiger who seemed to have been spared. As his leader's laughter began to die down, Ibiki pinched the bridge of his nose as he leaned against the wall, sighing. "So, before Hokage-sama loses it again, please explain what happened." "Rabbit?" He turned his hard gaze to the ANB wearing a rabbit mask and a dark green cloak with bright orange carrots drawn on it. It was extremely embarrassing, but it was better than the alternative. 4 hours ago, a majority of the ANBU had gone to the locker room located under the torture and interrogation force and either swapped out or put on their equipment. 2 hours later, it was revealed that someone had put itching powder, among other irritants, inside the chest plates, pants, and shirts that the ANBU wore. That explained why they were wearing the cloaks. Either they were naked under there, or were wearing personal clothing that could help enemies identify them since they came from their own closet. Rabbit was not done. The images on the cloaks appeared to be slow appearing, as it wasn't until the 3rd hour that the images began to appear. It took another hour to gather all the affected ANBU, though all is currently in the process of washing off the itching powder and is not present. With his report finished, Rabbit took a step back and allowed Ibiki to step into his place in front of the amused Hokage. Ibiki had a grim smile on his face that would normally make people on the other end cry. The Hokage did not, and Ibiki knew he wouldn't. Hiruzen was one of the few people Ibiki could admit he could probably never break. Not that he wanted to. With a sigh, Ibiki spoke. "I don't think I need to point out what is wrong with this picture, Hokage-sama. The ANBU base, which no one should know about, was broken into, trapped, and our ANBU were completely made fools of. And no one noticed a damn thing." That was what really irked Ibiki, because he recognized the paint. He knew it worked after 3 to 4 hours or if hit with water, which meant that whoever had done it while he was in the building. That pissed him off, and no one liked a pissed off Ibiki. Hiruzen seemed to understand as he let his amused smile drop, replaced with a considerate frown as he took a puff from his pipe. "Do you have anything to go off of?" he asked simply, trying to keep the new wave of information from making him lose his focus. While the situation was extremely amusing, it could have been disastrous. A trap or two, a delayed explosion tag, anything, could have been placed on those cloaks instead of drawings. Were they really so lax in security? Ibiki's words cut through his thoughts, but it didn't make the situation any better, only some. Enko was watching the desk for me and she told me someone threw a rock through the window and smashed a pot. She never saw who it was. Hiruzen nodded and Ibiki turned his gaze towards the other ANBU, silently asking them for any input. Tiger was the one that stepped up with Cat behind her. "I found a bottle in the locker room labeled 235. I had thought it was a harmless hair care product. Bears, in fact. All eyes turned towards the last female member of the ANBU who had long brown hair going down to her waist, and she stared at them blankly through her bare mask. It was not mine, but the number 235 is the color number for pink. She looked down at her own cloak, which was a bright pink with silver fish drawn on it. Childishly drawn, as a matter of fact. There was a sigh from Ibiki, who stared expectantly at Tiger. So where is this bottle? When the ANBU didn't respond, the head of TNI turned his gaze towards the rest of the ANBU. Did anyone else see this bottle? Only Kat stepped forward and Ibiki sighed louder. Kat was with Tiger when they visited the locker room, and they found a bottle. But now the bottle is gone and no one recalls seeing it. Which means either the culprit came back, or they were there the whole time. Tiger whispered, a feeling of dread in her stomach. Kat seemed equally distraught, if not more so. Kat was, after all, a censor. Failing to notice someone like that would mean she failed at her job. Not to mention the fact that, whoever had done this, saw them both naked if they were still there. There was hell to pay. The Hokage chose that moment to stand up, placing his hands behind his back as he stared at the ANBU collected in his office. We do not have enough information, but due to the harmless nature of this prank I will ask that you do not apprehend the culprit if you find them. But do find them. He looked around with a faint smile on his face. Search for any clues you may have missed. It's likely they left something else behind. But if anything, we should thank whoever did this for pointing out the flaw in our defense. Figure out how they got inside, so we can fix the hole. Dismissed. With that, he sat back down and slowly the ANBU teleported or walked out. Ibiki was the last out, giving a respectful nod to his Hokage before closing the door and leaving Kakashi with Hiruzen. Now you were saying, Kakashi-kun? Ah, right. Hey guys, Naruto's out there again. A childish voice called, resulting in a majority of the males that heard it to dash over towards the window of the large ninja academy building. Their teacher was out, and it seemed Iruka had decided to test everyone's ninjutsu and aiming, resulting in that class being outside. Naruto, however, had already finished both and was currently pounding away at a training dummy located to the side of the field away from everyone else. She took her jacket off, unknowingly giving the males a good view of her assets as she hammered away at the dummy. While she wasn't as developed as, say, Hinata, she was still one of the most developed in the academy, which was a constant source of envy among most of the upcoming kunoichi wannabes. Naruto didn't even seem to care, which got her a few points of respect from the males, even if they were a little too young to understand exactly why they were excited when she landed a kick. Still, even if she had known they were watching, Naruto would not have stopped. She was too focused on her target, landing blows that would cripple a human, but only sent the dummy back slightly. She growled in annoyance as she slammed a powerful blow into its midsection, following up with an uppercut that just tilted the dummy's head back. It was made to take far stronger blows than Naruto could provide, and it was the young Tsunade who tested their endurance. 3 hits from the super-powered Sannin was all they were able to get, no matter how powerful they made it. But Naruto wasn't put off by the fact that she couldn't break it. It was great training and a way to pass the time until her friends were done with their training. So she kept punching and kicking away until she heard someone approaching her, and she used the leverage of a kick to spin herself around and lean against the dummy to see who it was. Her azure gaze met Hinata's lavender, and she grinned at her friend, causing the shy Hyuga to blush slightly. Hey Hinata, how'd you do? The blonde asked casually, kicking her jacket up from its spot on the ground and catching it. Hinata couldn't help but marvel the fact that Naruto didn't seem tired at all despite the speed and power she was showing. She quickly cleared her thoughts though, knowing Naruto would grow concerned if she took too long to answer. Good, Naruto-chan. I got a perfect on both. Naruto smiled at her friend and quietly noted that Hinata would probably be, hands down, the rookie of the year if it wasn't for her test scores. She, like Naruto, seemed to have a problem with written tests no matter how much either studied. One would expect the heiress of a clan to know all about Konoha's history, but what she was taught in school usually conflicted what she learned at home, which resulted in a very confused heiress. This only further proved to Naruto that the rookie of the year system was stupid, but this wasn't the time or place to bring that up. Wanna spar while we wait? Don't think sensei will mind? The blonde asked, tossing her jacket onto the dummy she had just pounded away at. If it had any complaints, it didn't voice them. They're almost done, so... Naruto nodded her head and sighed, stretching with her hands above her head. I wonder if sensei would let me go home early? I need to set up things in my backyard. It wasn't unknown in their small group of friends that Naruto was an orphan that lived alone, or that she did her own chores. None of them really understood, or saw, what Naruto did since they had never been to her home, but she never mentioned her backyard before. What are you going to do, Naruto-chan? Hinata asked with a curious tone, her head tilted to the side. Naruto grinned as she jerked her thumb back towards the dummy she had just covered with her jacket. I ordered a training dummy yesterday. Going to set my backyard up to be a training field. Hinata's eyes widened in surprise, but Naruto didn't see it as she turned her attention towards the dummy in question. The Hokage had set it up for her to be able to get her own training field if she took care of the building for 2 years, which she did. She hadn't reminded him in person, but she knew the old man remembered. Having a sudden delivery of a lot of wood she knew she didn't order was her clue to that. Her backyard was perfect for a training field too, especially since it was intended to be large enough for 8 small families to use. It was about the size of the building itself and had a large fence surrounding it, keeping out any unwanted visitors, and 2 trees rested in the top left and in the middle of the yard. Irika's voice interrupted her thoughts as he approached them with the rest of the class trailing behind. There you two are. We're heading back inside until lunch, then you'll have to do the written exams. Naruto groaned loudly, pulling her jacket on with a frown. But Irika-sensei, I thigh, you know I'm going to fail anyways. Can't I just go home? I need to work on something. Irika frowned, crossing his arms as he stared at his blonde student as she zipped up her jacket. Now Naruto, you know information is vital too. Vital my butt. She interrupted, snapping her fingers in an annoyed fashion. I don't need to know about how the second shinobi war went. You don't even tell us about the battles, you just say who won and the political outcome of it. Irika's frown deepened as he puts his hands on his hips. Wasn't your goal to become Hokage, Naruto? You need to know politics for that. Naruto blinked, recalling a time in her earlier years where she proudly stated she would be the next Hokage. He controls everything. She thought to herself, giving Irika a flat stare. No, not everything. But he's definitely important. Outward, however, she simply said, no, not really. Not old politics. By the time I'm ready to take that hat, the world will change. It's not going to wait on me. Irika's eyebrows raised and he sighed, shaking his head. You still need to know them, Naruto, so come on inside. You do need them, so don't argue. It's part of your test, you won't graduate if you don't know the answers. Naruto frowned and let out an annoyed huff. Whatever, sensei. She grumbled out, not noticing Hinata's hand reaching out to her to comfort her as she ran towards the building. Surprisingly, she went for the wall instead and she began to jump up the side of the wall, using windows and holes in the wall for supporting her feet. The rest of the class watched in silence as she hopped into the classroom window, unsure of how to react to such an odd action. Scaling her building constantly, and climbing into buildings for her pranks gave her considerable skill in climbing, though she usually never showed off in class since climbing wasn't exactly important. Still, she had to admit it was rather satisfying being the only one in the classroom for once, and she grinned to herself, propping her legs up on the desk. Irika was the first back into the classroom and he glared in annoyance at the blonde when she shot him a grin. That was reckless, Naruto. You could have fell. The Chunin scolded, causing her grin to fall into a frown as she considered his words. I could have, but I didn't. Besides, I'm going to be a shinobi, right? Involuntarily, her mind flashed back to the convulsing man in Ibiki's torture chamber, and she gulped down the bile that came from the memory. They're scarier than a fall. Irika blinked at that, unable to give an honest retort, so he just made his way to his desk silently. Sakura, having heard the exchange, let out a teasing humph as she approached her friend, sitting down on the right side of the desk and leaving the middle seat between them open. That was reserved for Hinata. When did you get so smart, Naruto? The pink-haired girl teased, though inwardly she was just rather curious about why Naruto said that. She had a point, CHA. Her inner self noted, punching in the void that was her mindscape. As usual, however, Sakura made a point to ignore her inner self. Hinata sat down between them just as Naruto's grin appeared back on her face as she tilted her chair back with her feet. I'm always smart, Sakura-chan, don't be like that. Sakura rolled her eyes slightly. Yeah, smart? Like the time you drank milk past the expiration date? Naruto's face turned sour at the memory and she huffed. A fluke. It sounded fine and I was half asleep. The 2 girls beside her giggled at her, and she let out an annoyed huff, but quickly returned to grinning. She couldn't stay mad at them. Anyways, you 2 want to go out for ramen today? My treat. Sakura frowned slightly and Ino, who was sitting in the desk below them with Shikamaru and Chuji, since the seat beside Sasuke was taken by Ami, looked up at the trio. Not going to invite me, Goldie-chan? Naruto laughed softly, scratching behind her head. I don't mind if you come, but I can't really treat everyone, you know. Ramen is kind of fattening. Sakura pointed out, but it was half-hearted, and she was on the end of 2 hard stares as soon as she said it. She sighed as Naruto began to speak. It's fattening, yeah, but if you train it burns off fast. It's filling and the energy is needed. Hinata added as usual. Every time eating habits were mentioned, Ino and Sakura were scolded by their more serious friends. The constant way they did it was slowly wearing the 2 down, especially with Hinata and Naruto having the best figures out of everyone in the class, despite their lack of diet. Still, they weren't even done. You can get vegetable ramen if you don't like meat, but meat gives you the needed protein, and if you're camping I doubt you'll survive on berries. Isn't there fish ramen too? I'm not really a fan of fish, but yeah. I still eat it because it's good, and fish might be the only thing I can eat at some point. That was Naruto, always the realist. Ever since she found those shinobi books in her landlord's old house, she was the one pointing out the dangers of being a shinobi. You guys are making me hungry, Chuji complained, even as he munched down a handful of chips. Naruto, having been opening her mouth to continue her rant, let out a snort of laughter, staring down at the Akimichi with a smile. Sorry, Chuji, But you should get on them too. Out of everyone here, you know how helpful eating is. That could be taken the wrong way, but with Chuji being in a kimchi and as kind-hearted as they come, he just smiled. Well, it is really important. It's more important for an akimichi since we use our fat to attack, but if you don't take care of your body the right way, it'll shut off later. That got oldish stares from the females. Even Hinata and the chubby boy rubbed the back of his head in embarrassment. Well, that's what I heard at least. If you diet too much, your body won't grow properly. It's fatal for a ninja. It was fatal for everyone, really, but ninja pushed their bodies to the limit every day. If they didn't eat enough, or properly, it might not have enough strength to recover from most actions. Like being cut up, for instance. Sakura and Ino sighed, their heads drooping. Fine, we'll go. Naruto grinned and nodded her head, watching as the students began to walk out of the room. The test had been surprisingly short, especially for a final test, and it seemed Irika didn't mind the chatter while they worked. See you guys there then, Naruto said with a smirk before suddenly hopping out of her seat and diving forward, surprising the sleeping Shikamaru as her hands rested on his head for an instant, using it as a springboard that sent her forward, landing in front of Sasuke, who was still sitting down. If Sasuke was surprised, he didn't show it, but he did look up at Naruto as she jumped off his desk and through the window she had originally came into the room with. He half expected to hear a crunch from her hitting the ground, but a moment later he saw her running away from the school without even a limp. Troublesome woman, Shikamaru grumbled out, rubbing his head as he made his way towards the door. What is her fascination with jumping off my head? Chuji just gave his friend a pitying smile, since it wasn't the first time Naruto had used Shikamaru for a springboard. She usually didn't jump out the window though. I think she wouldn't do that if you weren't laying down all the time, Ino supplied, smirking as she made her way past the lazy Nara. I need sleep, lazy ass, troublesome woman. That got him a glare, but he just gave her a blank stare, causing her to roll her eyes. She'd never understand him. It wouldn't do to keep Naruto waiting. The girl was annoyingly impatient, so Ino didn't reply and chose to speed up to reach her destination instead. Sakura, however, stayed behind, staring longingly at Sasuke, who was, in turn, staring out the window silently. Sasuke-kun, would you like to join us? She knew Naruto wouldn't like that, but the blonde had said she had no interest in stopping her attempts with the Uchiha. Sasuke didn't respond or even acknowledge that she had said anything, but she could see from the reflection of the window that he seemed to actually consider it for a moment before shaking his head. No. Sakura visibly deflated, but nodded and turned towards the door. I'll, see you next time then, Sasuke-kun. HN, was his only reply, leaving Sakura dejected even further as she walked out of the room. Always the ladies' man, came a sarcastic voice, causing Sasuke to sigh in annoyance. Shut up, Kiba. Kiba just grinned, putting his hands behind his head as he walked towards the door with his trusty dog Akamaru, tucked in his jacket. Out of everyone, only Kiba and Naruto seemed to get under Sasuke's skin, but Naruto just seemed to stop caring about the Uchiha. Kiba, however, liked to tease him and fight him. He was a great sparring partner, but teasing him was the best part. Would you have gone if Naruto asked? Kiba prodded, leaning against the door frame as he stared at the brooding Uchiha. In truth, he liked the blonde himself. She was feisty, as his sister put it. But other than Hinata, she was the only girl that ignored Sasuke, and she didn't interact with Kiba much. No. Kiba's grin widened, knowing that getting an answer, even a simple one, from the Uchiha meant something more. AHN meant he didn't care, but an answer meant he cared slightly, even in a negative way, if you say so. Must have been a great view when she landed on your desk though. Sasuke didn't react to the teasing, but Kiba snickered anyways. See you later, Sasuke. I'll beat you next time. Naruto, stop that. Naruto pouted at Sakura and stopped spinning in her stool. But I was bored and my ramen isn't here yet. You literally just ordered. Ino chided, a frown on her face at her friend's antics. So long. She whined, causing everyone to either smile in amusement or roll their eyes. Their group consisted of Sakura, Hinata, Ino, Naruto, Chuji, and surprisingly Shikamaru, who had simply followed his friend out of instinct. Now they were all sitting in Ichiraku ramen, waiting on their orders. Chuji chuckled slightly and turned in his spinning stool to say something to Shikamaru when a loud squeak went through the air, causing him to blush in embarrassment as he stared down at the seat. Did he break it with his weight? That would be extremely embarrassing. Surprisingly, it was Naruto who seemed to understand his embarrassment as she got out of her seat. No worries, Chuji. That sounds like one of the screws came loose. I can fix it. Stand up, please. Chuji blinked in confusion but stood up to the side, watching as Naruto pulled a screwdriver from the inside of her jacket and slid her head under the stool, pushing her screwdriver into the bottom of it a moment later. Didn't take you for a fixer type, Naruto. Shikamaru noted as the girl stood up, spinning the stool experimentally with her hand. It didn't rotate as fast as before, but it didn't squeak either, causing Naruto to grin in accomplishment as she put her screwdriver up. It wasn't until she sat back down that she responded to Shikamaru's words. I have to be. Gigi gave me the whole building I live in, so I have to take care of it. She flipped a strand of hair over her shoulder, smiling at the Nara's bewildered expression. No one likes to live with me, so I take care of all the rooms and make sure they don't fall apart. It's not too hard, but I've learned a lot, mostly through trial and error, but he didn't need to know that part. It would be embarrassing to admit she had hammered her thumb more times than she could count. Thankfully, her fast healing fixed the bruise and lessened the damage in a day, but it still hurt. Sakura smiled at her friend, playfully punching her shoulder. An old gag between them. So why do you own the building? Shouldn't the landlord take care of that? Sakura hadn't heard the story of why Naruto owned it. Only the blonde knew that one. Naruto hummed to herself and shrugged, fiddling with the goggles around her neck. He died 2 years ago, I think. I never really met him, but Gigi said he didn't have any relatives and no one lived there but me, so he gave it to me. He's taking care of the payments till I get income. The Jinchuriki explained, a smile on her face. Shikamaru, however, frowned. Why give an academy student their own building? And who could pay for something like that? Who's Gigi, Naruto? He asked, rather bluntly, and she gave him a surprised look. Hokage Gigi is Gigi, duh. She seemed genuinely surprised Shikamaru hadn't known that. Apparently, no one knew that, because everyone was giving her wide-eyed looks now. The Hokage is your grandfather. Sakura managed to get out, her eyes wide at the implications. She thought Naruto was an orphan, but if she was related to the most powerful ninja in the village, then why was she so poor? Naruto just shook her head, chuckling, unknowingly answering Sakura's question. Sort of. I mean, I'm an orphan, so not really. He's just always been there for me, I guess. Not enough, but he was there. She kept that thought to herself though. No need to make them worry about her. I call him Gigi cause he likes it, and calling him Hokage seems silly. As the ramen was finally finished, having taken rather long due to Naruto, Chuji, and surprisingly Hinata ordering a vast amount, their attention was brought to the food rather than Naruto's situation. Shikamaru, however, had no problems multitasking and could not help but consider what Naruto had just told him. She was given special treatment by the Hokage, was never adopted like most orphans, and was given her own apartment complex because no one wanted to live near her. Something fishy was going on, but Shikamaru had no idea where to even begin looking. It also seemed that Naruto had not made the connection, but he was sure she knew something was wrong deep down. She was rather bright, even if she acted childish. It'd be troublesome, but he knew he had to figure it out to sate his own curiosity. If it helped Naruto out in the long run, maybe he could get her to stop using his head as a springboard. One could dream, and that's all Shikamaru did. It had taken a week, but the results were in and Naruto couldn't help but grin at her accomplishment. Her backyard, which had been bare except for the trees and grass, was now complete with standard training equipment. There were logs buried in the ground for target practice, 3 to be precise, a Tsunade-tested training dummy against the tree in the center, but most importantly there was a wooden shack she had made herself. It wasn't extremely sturdy, but it was enough for her uses. Inside of the shack were a few tables, a tanning rack, and a shelf for scrolls she made herself. The rack would probably not be used for anything for a long time, since she was rather rusty at being a hunter, but the shelf was another matter. It had several openings, enough to hold about 30 scrolls, and the top was already full of her own personal sealing scrolls. They were empty right now, but she had 2 more that held all her tools in her jacket. She had planned on turning the shack into a workshop of sorts, though only as a front. In truth, she planned on turning one of the apartments into her true workshop when she got more into crafting. She was already decent at it, but not enough to make anything original or without guides. It didn't help that she didn't have an infinite amount of resources either. Wish I had that with creating bloodline. The blonde thought but didn't dwell on it too much. Wishing wouldn't get her anywhere. She began to move towards her shack when she felt a presence behind her, and instinctively put her hand into her pouch even as she turned to see who it was. The last time someone had sneaked up on her they tried to pummel her with a sake bottle, though they didn't even seem to know who she was. She relaxed seeing the cat mask, though the memory the mask brought up caused her to blush. She forced it down before turning completely towards the ambu, a curious look on her face. What's up, Cat? If Cat was put off by the lack of manners, she didn't show it, though it was hard to show anything through the mask. Instead, she simply held her hand out towards the young Jinchuriki. Hokage-sama wishes to speak to you, Naruto. Come with me. Naruto blinked but shrugged, grabbing her hand and allowing Cat's chakra to wrap around her. It was an interesting experience to use the Shun Shinjutsu, body flicker, without actually using it. Though she doubted she'd ever get the control needed to use it on herself and another person, it was still fun to experience. Her trip was ended when they finally reached the Hokage's office and Cat let go of Naruto's hand, much to the blonde's disappointment, though she was careful to not show it. That wouldn't do. She turned her gaze towards where the Hokage sat with a smile, only to pale as she saw the tall imposing man standing beside him with his hands behind his back. The scarred man brought the memories of his convulsing and screaming victim back, and Naruto once again had to swallow the bile in her throat. Stay in control. You can't react like that every time you see him. How are you going to handle anything else? With that in mind, Naruto hopped up onto a chair and smiled at the Hokage, though she did give Ibiki a nervous glance. "What's up?" Sadly, it wasn't the Hokage that answered he, but Ibiki. "About a week ago, an ANBU locker room was broken into and sabotaged." Naruto arched her eyebrows, as if the information surprised her, and Ibiki continued. "We didn't know who did it, or why, but we got one clue that led us to you, Naruto Uzumaki." So did they actually know, or was he trying to stay in control? It was rather amusing to see the tall imposing man hold up a few strands of blonde hair, as if threatening her with them. Everything is a weapon. He could turn those into Senbon. That was an alarming thought, but it had been done in a book. The main character had infused his hair with chakra and then cut it, sending needles of death everywhere. The book was based off actual occurrences, so she wasn't about to write off his ability to hit her with the Senbon. Still, she wouldn't give in, even if it was something so trivial. "What's that have to do with me again? It's just blonde hair. I'm not the only blonde in the village, and it could have been someone from outside the village." It was a slightly desperate attempt to push suspicion off her, and it didn't seem to work as Ibiki growled in annoyance. "No one has this shade of blonde but you." "That's debatable. Ino's hair looks just like mine when it's not bunched up." Not a lie, but not the truth. Ino's hair was paler than Naruto's, even singularly, but they wouldn't know that without comparing them. The Hokage chose that moment to speak up, though she could tell he was amused by her resistance. "Naruto-chan, you aren't in trouble. We just want to know why you did it, and if we don't like your answer." That was Ibiki, and Naruto resisted the urge to snort in amusement. Good ninja, bad ninja? Another classic. It was in almost every book where the character was interrogated. Should she come clean? It was rather trivial, and she knew they already knew. Still, this was kind of fun. "I didn't do anything. You know me, Gigi, I go home and work on my house when I've got free time, or train. I don't have time to do silly pranks." None of her pranks were silly, and she always counted them as training, so she wasn't lying. If anything, the Hokage's amusement seemed to grow while Ibiki seemed even more annoyed. "Listen here, brat, sneaking into the TNI and into an ANBU protected zone is punishable by law, even to a civilian like you. Do you really want to try your luck in lying to the Hokage?" Instead of being intimidated, as he intended, the girl just snorted, glancing at him. "If it's ANBU protected, why do you think I was able to sneak in? I'm not even out of the academy." She turned her gaze towards the Hokage and leaned back, a smile on her face. "Even if I did, and I'm not saying I did, it's obvious that you guys didn't protect it very well if it took you a week to find any evidence. Crude evidence at that. That could be anyone's hair, dyed or transformed." She was quoting a book now, but they didn't know that. Hiruzen started to chuckle loudly, glancing towards Ibiki out of the corner of his eye. "I told you she would be interesting, Ibiki." Ibiki snorted in response but nodded his head, much to Naruto's confusion. "Indeed. I had expected her to yell out denials, not a well-reasoned one." Hiruzen simply smiled and turned towards Naruto with a knowing look in his eyes. "Did you do it, Naruto-chan?" "Huh." She looked over at her grandfather and nodded, crossing her arms with an innocent expression. "Yeah, it was fun. So you were lying to the Hokage the whole time?" Ibiki growled out, but Naruto just shot him a bewildered look while Hiruzen's smile grew. "What are you talking about? Gigi never asked if I did it or not. You did. I didn't lie to anyone but you. Last I checked, you're not the Hokage." Ibiki blinked a few times, unsure if he heard what she just said correctly, before chuckling slowly. "All right. I'll admit, kid, you're pretty good. It takes some guts and brains to work around me like that." Of course, he was sure he could break her easily in the usual methods, but this wasn't a very serious matter, so he didn't take it seriously. Still, there was one thing that had to be found out. "How did you get in though?" Naruto frowned slightly, seeming to consider not telling him before shrugging her shoulders. "I distracted your secretary by throwing a rock in the window." Ibiki snorted at hearing Anko described as a secretary, but said nothing. "I was going to go through the window after she ran out, but she just kind of left, so I walked inside." Looks like he owed Anko a stern talking to as well. "After that I just went through the vents. It was pretty straightforward from there." She paused and Ibiki frowned as she paled again, glancing towards him nervously before she seemed to calm herself. Ibiki sighed softly, crossing his arms. "Did you see something you didn't want to see?" It was a simple question, much like all of the ones he had asked her, but this one caused her to flinch before meekly nodding her head. He hoped she hadn't seen anything, but she was showing signs of it. What had he done that day? "I saw you poison that man," the blonde whispered, shaking slightly in her seat. "It was a little scary. The way he screamed." Hiruzen frowned and Kat placed a comforting hand on the blonde's shoulder, which seemed to steady her emotions as the shaking stopped. "But I dunno. It was kind of cool." That got everyone staring at her in confusion, and Naruto grinned, rubbing the back of her head. "I mean, you were in control, and it was cool. It was scary, but you were doing it for the village, right? And you probably got the info you wanted without a fight next time." When Ibiki didn't answer, she shrugged and rubbed her chin. "Anyways, where was I?" She snapped her fingers after a moment of thinking. "Oh yeah, I got into the locker room through the vent. After that I just did what I wanted, No one was around and I wasn't making enough noise to draw attention. Only Cat and Tiger came in, but they were just grabbing a change of clothes. Naruto ignored the tightening hand on her shoulder and she grinned, rubbing the back of her head. I got lucky there, I hid in a locker. With her story finished, Naruto began to squirm in her seat. So can I go? I was in the middle of working. Hiruzen hummed thoughtfully while Ibiki began to write on a piece of paper, no doubt copying down what Naruto had said. I suppose that would be alright. Thank you for telling the truth, Naruto-chan. How goes your training field? Naruto smiled wide and stood up, putting her hands on her hips. I haven't had a chance to try it out yet, but I made a shack by myself. Thanks for getting me a training dummy, I'll put it to good use. Hiruzen smiled and nodded his head. I'm sure you will, Naruto-chan. Cat? Could you escort Naruto home? Cat nodded her head and allowed Naruto to grab her hand. See you later, Naruto-chan. Be sure to practice for your exam. Naruto smiled and nodded her head as she felt Cat's chakra wrapping around her. Okay, Gigi. See you later. And with that, she was gone. Hiruzen chuckled and glanced over towards Ibiki, who had just finished noting the areas that needed extra protection. The vents were at the top. So what do you think, Ibiki? The Hokage asked with a smile while he prepared his pipe. Ibiki didn't respond at first and simply slid the paper over towards the Hokage, a frown on his scarred face. Not sure. She's interesting, to be sure. She thought ahead the whole time, and she seems determined. I'm a bit worried about what she heard affecting her. If anyone else had heard that the great Ibiki was worried about something, there would be no end to the teasing and underestimating. But he was just with the Hokage, so he allowed himself to relax. If it wasn't for her prisoner, I would say to let her meet with a Yamanaka, but Hiruzen nodded thoughtfully, taking a puff of his pipe at the same time. I wouldn't worry about her. She'll be fine. Then, as if an afterthought, the man picked up a piece of paper from a stack on the corner of his desk. Say, what do you think about? Well, look at the time. Got to go. Ibiki stated quickly, already moving towards the door at high speeds. He knew exactly what the Hokage was going to ask, and the answer was no. If the Hokage was put off by his attitude, he didn't show it and simply allowed Ibiki to leave. He chuckled softly and shook his head, putting down the Jounin assignment sheet down again. He had been trying to get the leader of TNI to train a genin team for some time, but the answer was always no. Perhaps Anko, then? He'd have to pull a few strings for that one. Then again, he was the Hokage. Naruto sighed to herself as she let the fish fall back into the water, a frown on her face as she considered her position. It was 2 days until the exam and she should be working on her bunshin, which was still completely worthless, even though she put as little chakra in it as possible. But she had another training in mind. A training method she read in a manga and decided to try for real, but with no festival in town she was forced to a river up in the mountains of Konoha. If she could mimic the technique, even to a small degree, it would speed her arms up considerably. The only problem was the process. It had taken her an hour just to be quick enough to grab 5 fish and allow them to dangle in the air. She had decided, stubbornly, she would only stop if she was able to capture all 15 fish before the first one went back in the water. I should get a pond in my yard, she thought to herself as her hands blurred, sending water and fish into the air as she reached into the river. I'd be able to do this at home. It was a good thing she did not have class today or tomorrow, since she was an hour's walk away from home, and she didn't want to walk back and forth. She sighed again, watching the 7 fish fall into the water with small splashes, quickly swimming away from her out of fear. She made her way further down the river, putting her hands behind her head as she walked. She was definitely improving. All she had to do was incorporate it into her fighting style. Did she even have a fighting style? That was a strange thought. She never learned anything but the academy style, and usually just attacked in any way that felt natural. Perhaps she should take another page from the manga and just learn a bunch of styles and push them together? I'm relying too much on a manga, she thought to herself as she reached a collection of fish, letting herself fall to her knees so she could reach them. But if it works, it works. I'm sure there's someone else out there doing the same. She had no way of knowing that, but it helped justify her methods to an extent. With that in mind, she pushed chakra into her arms and went back to work. Some time later. So all my hard work means nothing just because I can't do a stupid jutsu. Iruka winced from the harsh tone as the blonde girl stood in front of his desk, glaring at him in anger. It was the day of the exams and it was noted down that the failure to use any of the 3 ninjutsu would result in an instant failure. Naruto, despite her mastery of the henge and decent taijutsu, was unable to perform the basic bunshin. It wasn't necessarily her fault, but rules were rules. Now Naruto. The Chunin began, glancing towards his partner, Mizuki, for assistance. The white-haired man just looked amused, however, and Iruka knew he wouldn't help. You've known for a long time that you have to master the bunshin to graduate. Bull. What was the point of the test then? She slammed her hands down on his desk and Iruka sighed, rubbing the back of his head. I passed everything except the bunshin. Let me graduate. Surprisingly, it was Mizuki that nodded his head in agreement, looking towards Iruka with a smile. Why not, Iruka? She's proven to be a capable kunoichi, and she did make a bunshin. Iruka frowned at his partner and sighed, shaking his head while glancing towards the sickly-looking clone on the floor. I can't pass her. It's the rules. I'm sorry, Naruto. He gave the blonde a pleading look, hoping she would understand, but she returned his look with an angry glare. With a humph, the blonde spun around and walked out of the room, slamming the door open, and Iruka winced as he saw it nearly break off its hinges. Hinata was the first to Naruto, her eyes wide in surprise from seeing her friend's face twisted into such anger, but Naruto just brushed past her, growling. Not now, Hinata. I need some time alone. She breathed out when the Hyuga began to follow her. Hinata frowned but nodded slowly, looking down. I'm sorry, Naruto-chan. She whispered softly, turning her own angry glare towards the Chunin in the room. Mizuki just held his hands up defensively while Iruka looked like he was about to cry. It wasn't like he wanted to fail her, but rules were rules. Naruto pushed past the adults that were gathered outside to congratulate their children, ignoring the glares that they were sending her way. Some even moved in front of her, just to annoy her or make her fall down, but she slid past them with practiced grace, keeping her head down. She found her way to the swing that hung from a tree in front of the academy and sat there, staring at the ground. It wasn't long after that the students began to pour out, some proudly showing off their headbands and some looking dejected. But all of them went to their parents. Sakura was among them, grinning up at her mother who was staring down at her proudly. Her mother was a lean woman with bright pink hair and green eyes, looking a lot like Sakura, but there were noticeable wrinkles on her face and bruises on her hands. She was a well-known trader and normally would not be in the village at all, but with Sakura graduating from the academy today, she decided to take a day off. Hiruzen smiled down at her daughter, patting her head. Good work, Sakura. Your father would be proud. Sakura smiled sadly and nodded at her mother. Her father had died when she was just 4 years old, having received fatal injuries in the battle with the Kyuubi that should have killed him, but he stubbornly pushed himself to his limits so that he could see his daughter grow. Sakura could just barely remember his face, smiling down at her from his hospital bed. She shook her head, clearing her thoughts. Thanks, Mom. She grinned, putting her hands on her hips. Now Sasuke-kun will have to notice me and… She paused, completely missing the slight frown on her mother's face as she looked towards the swing Naruto was sitting at, though the blonde girl did not seem to notice her. Sakura bit her lips slightly at the sight. Naruto was one of the few that didn't pass, but unlike the rest she didn't have someone to go back to at home to help her feel better, or help her with her problem. She was completely alone. The young Haruno started to make her way towards her blonde friend, but a hand on her shoulder stopped her. She looked curiously up towards her mother who was staring at Naruto with a frown. Stay away from her, Sakura. She's not someone you want to get involved with. Hai whispered, causing her daughter to frown. What? Naruto's great. That got her mother's attention and her frown grew larger at the amount of alarm in her mother's eyes. She had never mentioned Naruto to her mother before, mostly because she always said the girls and I instead of a specific person when she was telling her mother about her day. She didn't understand Hai's distrust with the blonde. She's one of the nicest people I've met. Even if she's kind of slow. Hai resisted the urge to growl and she began to pull her daughter away from the crowd, shaking her head. It's a trick, I'm sure. Don't get involved with her, Sakura. Oh. Don't pull so hard. And what are you talking about? Naruto wouldn't. Little brat killed my husband. The older Haruno muttered under her breath, still pulling Sakura along. Sakura froze as she heard the words, but her mother didn't even seem to realize she spoke aloud. Naruto? Kill someone? How could Naruto even kill her father? He had died from his wounds and Naruto wasn't even around back then. Sakura frowned and glanced back towards Naruto with her eyes narrowed. I'll treat her to ramen later. My mom is going crazy. She did love her mother, but the woman was barely around. She might have got an illness on her travels. Unknown to Sakura or Hai, the blonde had heard the whole conversation, along with many others. It only served to increase her depression, but she did smile slightly at Sakura's praise. She's one of the nicest people I've met. Heh, if only she knew Naruto was the one responsible for filling the girl's bathtub with melted marshmallows. Sakura had complained about it for a month. Still, she did like the pink-haired Kunoichi's company. It was a shame they would probably never see each other again. Damn Iruka. It's not my fault I can't do the bunshin. She was sure of that. Something or someone had something to do with it. She could only barely make a clone and they always looked sick and pale, barely able to stand up on their feet. She sighed, watching the last few students file out, and she gave a sad smile to Ino who was staring at her with worry etched on her features. The Jinchuriki waved her hand dismissively and Ino frowned but slowly followed after her father who just glanced at Naruto as they passed her. She watched them go with a sad smile on her face, resting her head against the rope that held the swing up. Must be nice, having a family. I wonder what my parents would have done. It wasn't the first time she thought this, or the first time she ignored the stab of jealousy in her gut. So lost in her thoughts she didn't notice the figure step up behind her until a hand fell onto her shoulder, causing her to jump slightly. She looked up, her eyes a little wide as she stared up at the smiling face of Mizuki. Hey there, Naruto. Want to come talk for a bit? There's something I should tell you. Naruto frowned slowly but nodded her head, getting off the swing. It wasn't like she had anything better to do. Mizuki smiled as he watched the blonde disappear in the distance, nodding his head slightly. That should do it. The little brat won't know what hit her. The words weren't thought with venom, but instead a soft affection. Originally, he had hated the girl for being the Kyuubi brat, even if he knew how seals worked to a degree, but that had changed when she had gotten older. She reminded him of Tsubaki, his girlfriend, in their younger years. Kind, spirited, and loud. Tsubaki had mellowed out considerably since then, becoming much more quiet after some serious shinobi training and the loss of their third teammate. Naruto's attitude in class, and when it came to training, put a smile on his face even though he knew the Kyuubi was behind her stomach. He had considered helping her with the bunshin, but it was forbidden for teachers to play favorites like that. Not to mention the higher-ups would never allow it unless the Hokage himself came down. She was, after all, the Kyuubi brat, and that alienated her from the teachers more than the students. Still, he felt he owed her something. Had it not been for her bright smile, which was plastered on her face even when she messed up, he might have done something unforgivable. He shook his head, smirking to himself as he sat down and waited. I might spend a year in prison, but I think it will be worth it. I was getting tired of teaching anyways. It was surprisingly easy to slip through the window and roll across the ground, dodging the rather obvious seals on the wall that would trigger an alarm. Naruto snorted to herself as she sat up on her knees, a frown on her face as she looked about. She had just sneaked past several guards and 4 alarms to the Hokage's private vault without even having to use her henge. It was a little annoying how easy it was. Still, she wasn't about to complain. It was a test, right? She figured they lowered the difficulty of it just for her, though she was certain she could have gotten in anyways. The alerts were designed for grown shinobi, not a 12-year-old. Shaking her head, she looked around and hummed to herself as she spotted a golden-colored scroll sitting on top of a shelf. She looked side to side, spotting 2 pieces of paper on the wall beside the shelf, creating a transparent barrier that kept the scroll from being touched or falling accidentally. It was a little weird that she was able to see perfectly fine in the dark room, but she barely registered that as she stood up and pulled her fist back slowly. She tapped the barrier slightly and hummed as she felt like she just tapped a wall. I can do this, she thought, closing her eyes and pulling both fists back to ready her attack. In a blur of motion, both of her fists shot forward and slammed into the left side of the barrier. Before the barrier even reacted to the blow, 3 more fists were slamming into the same spot and sending cracks along the barrier. As her 50th blow struck, the barrier shattered and the seal on the left that was holding it up burst into flames. With a smirk, she pulled the scroll free and rolled it under the alarm seals and rolled after it a moment later. Just as she was about to jump out of the window that she used to get in, the door snapped open and light flooded the room. Her eyes widened as she saw the outline of the Hokage standing there, staring at her with a confused frown on his face. Naruto-chan? What are you doing in here? And he paused, noticing the scroll she held in her arms, and his eyes narrowed. Naruto-chan. Naruto gulped and turned towards him, placing her hands up in an unfamiliar seal. Oiroke no Jutsu. Sexy Jutsu. In a poof of smoke, the young girl was replaced with a buxom blonde woman that gave him a seductive smile, her rear sticking out of the window as she bent over towards him, giving him a great view of her that were just barely covered by the scroll she held. The Hokage's eyes widened and a trail of blood slowly dripping out of his nose, but his face only turned red when his eyes met the blonde's lovely azure eyes. The woman smirked and licked her bright red lips. Something wrong, Sarutobi-kun? She breathed out, her eyelashes fluttering at him. Without warning, Hiruzen gasped and flew backwards, blood spewing from his nose with enough force to slam him into the wall, knocking him out temporarily. In another puff of smoke, the blonde woman was replaced by her younger self, who was chuckling as she pulled the scroll onto her back. Too easy, Gigi. Too easy. With that, she bent backwards and let herself fall down out of the window, landing nimbly on the edge of another, and using it to flip herself onto a roof. She grinned to herself, hopping to the next roof after a brief run to get her momentum. Now all I have to do is get to a quiet spot so I can train. Then I can pass. She paused as she landed on a roof, a frown on her face as she crossed her arms. Wait. Gigi was surprised to see me, and they would definitely tell the Hokage if someone was taking this test. Was I tricked? It was a disturbing thought. The lack of resistance did point to them giving her a break, but the Hokage not knowing about it, or confronting her at all? She knew the Hokage could take her, if he was being serious. She just caught him by surprise, and it was unlikely her Oiroke no Jutsu would work a second time, at least to the same degree. What did Mizuki say? Go get the forbidden scroll of sealing. Her eye twitched as she realized he said forbidden. She was too caught up in her depression to realize what that meant before. Afterward, go to a shack located north of the village, but still within the wall. Many ninja will follow you after you leave with the scroll. You have to lose them and learn one technique in order to pass. But if Mizuki did trick her, then that meant he was going to be the only one searching for her, at least until the Hokage woke up. Not only that, but she knew she couldn't take him unless she took him by surprise. Should I return the scroll? No. I've already done the crime, might as well spend the time. A line from her favorite book about an accidental criminal. She shook her head and jumped across the roof again, but this time she went in a different direction, towards the safest place in the village, her home. A brown-haired man grunted as he felt a kunai bury itself into his shoulder, glaring at the cat-like mask staring him down. Cat glared right back, even if he couldn't see it through her mask. Around them both were several burnt-down houses, and two of her fellow ANBU, Mouse and Owl, were nursing their light wounds nearby. The rest of the ANBU were searching for survivors and helping civilians evacuate the area. It had been 10 minutes ago that several parts of the rich district of Konoha was suddenly assaulted by various fireballs and sunk into the ground by a Doton Jutsu. The ANBU, all of them, had just arrived in time to see a brown-haired man destroy a building with a fireball and quickly rush to subdue him. It was surprisingly difficult. The man proved to show some form of sensing ability, as he continuously dodged attacks he should not have seen, and he had used several shuriken made of stone to cut Owl's leg. The masked ANBU had quickly performed a counter that left the man skidding back, but in return he had cut Mouse's shoulder with a Fuma shuriken, but thankfully it was a shallow wound. Now he was pinned to a wall with a kunai sticking out of his shoulder, and Cat's blade against his nose. Any last words before we turn you over to Ibiki? The man just smirked slightly at Cat's blunt attitude. Plenty, but for now I'll simply say, distraction complete. Cat's eyes widened as the man melted into mud before her very eyes. A Doton Bunshin. Shit! She cursed, pulling her blade away. They had been fighting a mud clone the whole time? She mentally cursed herself for having such weak sensor abilities, but clones were always so hard to tell apart. ANBU, fall back. This was a distraction. We have to. It's too late. All eyes turned towards the voice, and Cat frowned behind her mask at the sight of the silver-haired ninja, copycat Kakashi Hatake. He gave her a lazy wave and smiled under his mask. Yo. Just came to tell you that the Hokage was attacked and the Forbidden Scroll was stolen. We screwed up. Silence fell and Kakashi rubbed the back of his head. We're looking now and the Hokage is fine, but... He suddenly turned his head just as another man fell into the area. The gray-haired Chunin that landed looked slightly out of breath, but he practically yelled his next words. I just saw Naruto flee into the forest with the scroll on her back. Kakashi, we have to get after her fast. She's good at hiding. Kakashi frowned under his mask and nodded his head. Lead the way, Mizuki. I'll get my dogs to sniff her scent. Mizuki nodded his head and quickly ran off towards the forest. Kakashi followed behind him, though he turned his head slightly as he saw Cat catching up. Shouldn't you be? All has it handled. I can't allow this injustice to go unpunished. I have a bone to pick with Uzumaki anyways. Kakashi chuckled softly. I'm sure there's a story behind this, so let's not act too rashly. She didn't seem like the kind to do this without reason. He hadn't met her, of course, but the Hokage did speak of her fondly. Cat glanced at him, then turned her eyes back to Mizuki. How was the Hokage defeated? She asked curiously, though she frowned as Kakashi let out a perverted giggle. When he finished, he turned towards her with an eye smile. Let's just say he's definitely Jiraiya's teacher. Cat's face fell at that, and even Mizuki, who had been listening in, stumbled slightly. Kakashi chuckled at their reactions and shrugged his shoulders. I might have lost to it too. The rest of the trip was spent in silence until they reached a clearing in the woods with a wooden shack in it. Mizuki frowned as he looked around, putting his hands on his hips. She couldn't have gone any further than this. The two other ninja landed behind him, but a third soon joined them. Mouse bowed his head towards Cat and Kakashi as they turned towards him. We have located and subdued the holder of the scroll. She went willingly, but it is unknown what she learned. We found her at her house. The last part was said with a faint amusement, and Cat nodded her head, suddenly pulling her blade out and pointing it towards Mizuki. Arrest this man. Mouse instantly went to obey, and Mizuki frowned but put his hands up to show he wasn't holding anything. What did I do? He grumbled. I just saw her come this way. Must have been a bunshin. Cat just shook her head as Mouse took the Chunin's hands and tied them behind his back. I don't know if you did see her or not, but I am a censor. Mizuki's eyes widened, but he relaxed soon after. You know what that means, don't you? I can tell it was your chakra that was controlling that Doton bunshin. Cat explained as the man was pushed forward towards her, and she stared down at him through her mask. You'll have fun with Ibiki. Despite the situation, Mizuki just smirked up at her and shrugged his shoulders. Do what you will. I'm sure it paid off. He arrogantly stated, starting to walk towards the village on his own. Come on, I don't have all day. The two ANBU, and one ex-ANBU, frowned as they watched him, but soon they were all going back towards the village. Hopefully they would figure out what was going on. Naruto yawned as she dangled upside down, her hair falling down towards the ground. She was sitting backwards on a chair, her legs curled around the top to keep her from falling, and she was currently in the Hokage's office, waiting for the old man to show up. It was about an hour after she had been captured, though it had taken them nearly over an hour to find her in the first place. She had just been recovering from the use of the techniques she learned when they, quite literally, dropped in on her. It was rather amusing that they seemed surprised she didn't jump from the sight of them and run. She didn't put up any resistance when they grabbed the scroll and tied her hands up, and now she was waiting for the Hokage while two masked ANBU stood guard by the door, staring at her silently. One was Tiger, which caused her to blush slightly from the memory, and the other was Rabbit. Neither of them said anything to her, despite her attempt to get a conversation going. She yawned as she dangled from the seat, but when the door opened her face lit up into a smile as she saw the old man walk into the room. "Hi, Gigi. What's up?" she asked with a grin, though it fell as she saw him give her a sad smile. He was tired. It showed in his eyes and face. He sighed and walked past her, taking a seat in his desk while Naruto flipped herself forward to sit properly in the chair, frowning still as she stared at the man she called grandfather. Hiruzen sighed, putting his hands together in front of him as he stared at the blonde. "Naruto-chan, why did you take the scroll?" It was a simple question, one she probably would have answered no matter who asked it. She shrugged. "I was told to. I was told I could learn a technique from the scroll that would let me pass the test." The Hokage's frown deepened and he sighed. "Mizuki, I take it?" She didn't nod, but he could see the flash of surprise in her eyes, causing him to sigh again. "I cannot fault you, Naruto-chan. It was, after all, only natural you would trust and listen to your teacher. But you must not be so reckless in the future, especially if you are trying to be a ninja. I am sorry you cannot learn from that scroll." Naruto's face suddenly lit into a grin and she chuckled softly. "I already did. See, watch." She put up a hand seal and the two ANBU behind her tensed as she shouted, "Kage Bunshin no Jutsu." In an instant, there were 10 Narutos standing in the office, each one with their own smirk or grin. Hiruzen stared at the scene with his jaw dropping slightly in surprise while the original Naruto put her hands behind her head. "See? I learned it. A Bunshin Jutsu. I learned the Kunai one too." She scrunched her nose up. "It was a little hard to learn that one. I probably wouldn't have tried it if I wasn't at home." Hiruzen was impressed, and it showed on his face. He didn't expect her to learn from the scroll, and it seemed that what Mizuki had told Ibiki was true. 50 minutes ago, Mizuki tapped his fingers against the top of the table he was sitting at, staring at the tall imposing man sitting on the other side. "So? Not going to ask me anything? I'll tell you whatever you want, I've got no reason to lie." The man, Ibiki, frowned and sighed. "What were you trying to accomplish?" Mizuki chuckled slightly, leaning back in his chair. "In what? Distracting the ANBU or burning the houses? Both," was the curt reply. Mizuki shrugged his shoulders, smiling still. "Well, the burning was because those houses were empty and it was easy to distract the ANBU with a sudden fire." He shrugged. "As for distracting, I had to give Naruto some time." Ibiki's frown increased and he let out a sigh. "Why? What do you hope to accomplish by helping Uzumaki?" Ibiki was getting a little annoyed with Mizuki's constant smile, but he was being willing to talk and Ibiki wasn't in the mood to bother with anything unneeded. "She can't preform the Bunshin Jutsu. I know the Kage Bunshin is in that scroll somewhere. The Hokage didn't really keep it a secret." He waved his hands slightly. "I'm not allowed to help her with her problem. The higher-ups won't let me even talk to her outside class for more than a few minutes. I only got her to know the plan because they were busy with the end of school." Ibiki frowned at the man who just continued to smirk at him in an annoying manner. "You still haven't told me why you would go to such lengths for Uzumaki." Mizuki chuckled slightly, resting his head on his chin. "Plenty of reasons. She needed it, and it's my duty as a teacher to help out in any way I can." Ibiki slammed his hands down in a rare show of anger. "That does not mean you endanger civilians and destroy Konoha's property. That's treason." Ibiki growled out his words and his growls only grew louder as Mizuki rolled his eyes slightly. "I warned all of the civilians that there was going to be a contained fire. No one lived in those buildings and I made sure no one was nearby. They were going to be torn down within a week anyways," Mizuki explained, leaning back in his chair again and putting his feet up on the table. Ibiki growled slightly again and stood up, glaring at the man. "You think you're smart, don't you? Covering all the bases and trying to make sure you don't get in trouble. You don't even know what you..." He paused, turning his head as he heard the door open and he instantly straightened up as the Hokage walked into the room, his hat tipped down to hide his face. "Hokage-sama." Hiruzen nodded to the man, then turned his gaze towards Mizuki, who was still smiling, not looking bothered by Ibiki's outburst. "Mizuki-kun. It is a shame it has come to this," the old Hokage said as he took the seat Ibiki had been sitting at before, crossing his hands over each other. "I have been listening, so no need to repeat yourself. Now please tell us why you helped Naruto-chan." "I had thought you hated her for her prisoner." The Hokage's words made his lips twitch downward, but only for an instant. "I suppose I did hate her at some point, but that was before I was stuck with her." He chuckled slightly, putting his hands behind his head. "I guess I grew fond of her, even if we never spoke much. It was inspiring to see her get up again every time she failed. Reminded me a lot of my old teammate." He wouldn't mention that he was seeing his teammate currently. He didn't want to let her know about it just yet. The Hokage smiled slightly at the man, knowing his words were genuine. "Still, I'm afraid I can't just let you go, Mizuki-kun. Naruto either. Stealing that scroll was all my idea." The gray-haired man interrupted, causing the two to raise their eyebrows at him. He smirked slightly, leaning forward now with his feet back on the ground. "I told her to do it. I said she would be able to pass if she learned a jutsu from the scroll, and I knew the first one was Kage Bunshin. Hiruzen frowned and studied the man's face. It didn't appear that he was lying, but if what he said was true, then it was obvious they had all underestimated the Chunin. Is that so, Mizuki-kun? And how did you know the Kage Bunshin was first without looking in the scroll yourself? Mizuki snorted slightly and shook his head. A mistake by a friend of mine, actually. He got drunk after becoming a jounin and was going on about learning the first jutsu he saw in the scroll when you allowed him to view it. It wasn't hard to put together what jutsu it was when he started using the Kage Bunshin around the village. Mizuki explained with an amused tone, smiling as he saw Ibiki pinch his nose and the Hokage chuckle softly. I suppose that would do it. The Hokage chuckled, starting to stand up. Well, I cannot guarantee you won't be kept for a while, Mizuki-kun, but I am glad that someone is watching out for Naruto-chan. He was about to leave when Mizuki held his hand up. Actually, Hokage-sama, I have a few more things to talk about. It's about Orochimaru, present time. Hiruzen shook his head to clear the memories, purposely ignoring the ones about Mizuki's connection to Orochimaru. He needed to focus on Naruto first. Speaking of the blonde, it seemed she had taken to sitting upside down in the chair again, though this time she was facing the desk rather than the door, and her goggles on her head were starting to slide off. He chuckled softly at her antics and shook his head. Naruto-chan, sit up straight and close your eyes. I have something to give you. Naruto frowned but flipped herself into an upright position and closed her eyes. What is it, Gigi? She asked with a curious look on her face, causing Hiruzen to chuckle softly at the cute expression. He slowly stood behind her and tied something around her neck, smiling to himself and walking back in front of her when he was done. It's done. Open your eyes. She slowly opened her eyes and frowned, looking down at her neck. Her eyes widened at the sight of the gleaming metal, and she hastily tilted it up slightly, staring at the hidden leaf symbol in the center of the metal. It was obviously not new, having various scratches and slight dents in it, but its meaning was clear. She looked up at the old man with tears brimming in her eyes as he smiled softly at her. Congratulations. You paoof! The oof was from the girl ramming into him, wrapping her arms tightly around him and crying into his robe. He smiled sadly, stroking her head as she buried her face into his chest. Thank you, thank you, thank you! She cried out, tilting her head back so she could see his face. So, I'm not in trouble at all. Hiruzen sighed and shook his head, slowly ruffling her hair. No, not this time. But you're a kunoichi now, and that sort of action won't be forgiven again. That deflated her mood slightly, but she nodded. He smiled, trying to ease her mood. Now, Naruto-chan, I have some time off tonight. Why don't we get Iruka-san and eat at Ichiraku? Two bright blue eyes widened before bouncing up and down as the blonde nodded excitedly. Yes, yes. Iruka-sensei is going to be so surprised. Ha! I can't wait to rub it in Ino's face too. The blonde laughed as she spun backwards, nearly tripping over the chair she had been sitting in. She quickly started to bounce out of the room with a chuckling Hiruzen behind. Before he exited the room completely, however, he turned his head towards the Anbu tiger. There's a scroll with Ibiki. Make sure it gets to Jiraiya. Tiger nodded her head slightly in response and disappeared with a poof. Gigi. Come on. Ramen is waiting. Hiruzen chuckled softly and nodded, closing the door behind him. Coming. It was the next day that Naruto found herself smiling brightly as she greeted the day, in contrast to the gloom she had felt before. She was a ninja. A true kunoichi. It was enough to make her giggle upon waking, even though she knew the hardest part had yet to come. She still had a few days before they were required to meet back at the academy to know what team they were placed on. Apparently her passing had caused the day to move up a bit, which gave her plenty of time to train and, most importantly, make use of her new jutsu. With a grin, the blonde placed her fingers together in a seal and summoned enough clones to fill her bedroom. She smirked to herself as they stood there, staring at her with smiles on their faces. Before, when she had just learned the jutsu, she had to literally beat down 100 clones until she was standing alone. Apparently that was how the clones wanted to decide who was the true Naruto, so she had to assert her dominance as the original. It left her pretty drained, but the outcome was worth it. Nodding to herself, she pointed at the clones. You know what to do. The roof needs new tiles, the pond needs digging, and I need to practice speed training with my legs. You 5. She pointed at a random corner, and 5 of the clones gave her a mock salute. Transform and roll out. I want food, nails, and wood. The 5 nodded and quickly left the room after transforming into a more forgettable face. The rest of the clones quickly left as well to do their own designated tasks. 30 minutes later, after the original Naruto had a light breakfast, the girl found herself frowning and staring down at her now empty bowl of ramen. I can't use this jutsu in battle recklessly, she thought to herself, referring to the Kage Bunshin. Apparently she received any memories of the things the clones did, but unless they willingly dispelled themselves she found herself unable to view how exactly they died. One of the clones were working on the roof and accidentally hammered her own thumb when a bird distracted her, causing the clone to poof into smoke. She didn't recall actually taking the hit, just suddenly disappearing, but one of the other clones had noticed one poof and dispelled itself willingly to tell its creator what happened. Naruto found herself a bit dejected at the news because of how useful the jutsu was, but using it recklessly would result in some mental problems, she was sure. If I don't remember that the clones died by rushing in, I might find myself rushing in purely out of habit. I'll have to make them more durable or agile somehow. She shook her head slightly. No time for that right now though, she had work to do. I'm heading out, see you later Dad. A young blonde called out to her father, a smile on her face as she saw him wave her off. See you dear? Take care and make sure that friend of yours is cheered up. The tall man said with a smile, watching his daughter grin and nod her head, naturally. As if she could stay unhappy around Ino Yamanaka. The young blonde yelled, grinning as she hopped out of the door and closed it behind her with a click. As soon as she was out of her father's sight, her smile fell into a frown as she made her way down the street. She was worried, and rightfully so. Naruto had seemed extremely depressed yesterday and Ino, for the life of her, could not think of a way to help her friend. She was lucky the meeting day for New Genin was pushed up a few days. It gave her time to help her friend get over it. Hopefully the whiskered blonde wouldn't hate her for passing, but Ino doubted she would. Naruto was always very nice, even if she was a little slow and sometimes said rude things without meaning to. Still, she didn't want to upset her fellow blonde. The girl was practically her best friend. It was only the lack of interest in boys and clothes that kept her from earning that title completely. Ino smiled as she saw the friend that did appreciate boys walking down the street. She quickly sped up, slapping the girl on the back and causing the pink-haired girl to stumble slightly before glaring at Ino, the Hittite hanging around her neck shining in the light. Hey forehead! Ino grinned, ignoring the glare completely as she put her hands on her hips. Off to see Naruto? Sakura huffed in annoyance, rolling her eyes as her anger faded away. It wasn't like it hurt anyways. Yeah. She looked really depressed yesterday. My mom wouldn't let me talk to her though. The pink-haired Nin rubbed the back of her head slightly, a small habit she received from Naruto. Ino frowned at the mention of Sakura's mother. Why would she have a problem with Naruto? Hai was usually rather pleasant to be around, though she always skipped around the Sasuke topic when it came up. Ino was brought out of her thoughts when she noticed someone fell into step beside her and Sakura. She turned her head and smiled at the familiar bundle of blue hair bouncing beside her. Hey, Hinata. Going to see Naruto too? Hinata turned her lavender gaze over to Ino, smiling softly as she nodded. Yes. I wasn't able to talk to her yesterday after the test. I had to wait for Kurenai-sensei to pick me up. Both girls seemed confused at why Hinata would need to be picked up by a jounin, but the Hyuga heiress continued as if it was natural. I had to tell my father I was meeting her to get out of the house though. Both of them now winced slightly, their confusion forgotten as they recalled how strict the Hyuga clan was. It was no surprise Hinata wanted to get away from them for a while. I had to lie to my mom as well. Told her I was going to hang out with Ino. Sakura admitted, sticking her tongue out. Guess it wasn't a complete lie though. Ino rolled her eyes slightly and the three fell into a comfortable silence, the worry they had for their friend making them unwilling to get into their usual conversations. When they finally reached Naruto's complex, Ino and Sakura had trouble keeping their jaws up at the sight that greeted them, while Hinata just stared with wide eyes. The complex was big, bigger than they had thought and definitely not what they expected an orphan 12-year-old to have. The biggest surprise was the amount of 12-year-old girls currently scaling the building, each with their own hammer or piece of wood. They were so taken by surprise that they didn't even notice one land in the yard and walked towards them, her hands behind her head. Yo! What's up, girls? The blonde greeted, pulling the three out of their shock as she smiled. Naruto chuckled softly, scratching her cheek. I didn't think you guys knew where I lived. The girls didn't respond and the clone took it as a chance to point behind her towards the complex. Boss is at the back if you're here to see her. That snapped the three kunoichi out of their trance and Sakura frowned, her head tilted to the side. Boss? What does that mean? And what's with all these clones, Naruto? Hinata nodded quietly in agreement, wanting to know the answers as well, while Ino just moved past the three to get to Naruto's backyard. Asked the boss. I've got work to do. The clone replied simply, not giving the remaining two girls a second glance as she walked back towards the building. The two watched as the girl made a slight jump, then pulled herself up to the balcony with one arm and flipped onto the roof a moment later. Sighing, Sakura quickly went after Ino with Hinata trailing behind, though the lavender-eyed girl took a moment to glance up at the numerous Narutos running around on top of the roof, a faint blush on her features. So many. I wish I could. Hinata! Come on! The Hyuga heiress jumped at Sakura's loud voice and quickly followed her, fiddling with her fingers as she walked. Sakura smiled at her friend and quickly turned the corner to the backyard, only to run straight into Ino. Gah! What's the deal, Ino pig? Don't just stand there. Sakura griped, moving beside her blonde friend and glaring at her. Ino, however, didn't even respond to Sakura's complaint and simply held her hand up, pointing towards the yard with her mouth hanging open and her eyes wide in surprise. Sakura frowned and followed her friend's gaze, only for her own mouth to drop open in surprise while Hinata, having stepped beside Sakura, was blushing with wide eyes at the sight that greeted them. The entire field was littered with Narutos, at least double or triple the amount that was located on the roof. There were several digging what looked like a pond in one of the corners of the yard, another carrying stacks of wood towards the shack located nearby. The last group seemed to be hammering away at a large wall of wood, near the edge of the yard, which was marked by the large fence meant to keep out any unwanted visitors. The exception to the working Narutos was a single Naruto that was pounding away at the training dummy that was stuck to the ground, near one of the trees. The three girls watched in slight awe as Naruto's fists blurred and slammed into the dummy multiple times, though it only seemed to make it lean back slightly. The sound of the dummy snapping back into place jolted Ino out of her shock, and she began to stomp towards the training Naruto with a frown on her face. Naruto! The girl turned her head towards Ino, starting to open her mouth to greet her, but could only let out a squeak as Ino gripped the front of her jumpsuit with both hands. Ino-chan? The blonde said with a startled expression as Ino glared at her, holding her up slightly. There was an odd fear in Naruto's eyes, as if she expected to be struck at any moment. Ino felt her heart clench at the fearful expression and let go of Naruto's shirt, sighing. Here we were worried about you, and then we find you actually knew a Bunshin jutsu the whole time? The girl's entire body was just screaming annoyance as she glared at Naruto with her hands on her hips. Naruto grinned sheepishly, rubbing the back of her head. Sorry, Ino-chan. I only got up a while ago, so. The lack of fear on her face helped Ino relax quite a bit, but she still let out an annoyed huff as Hinata and Sakura approached the two. That's not the point, you dummy! At Naruto's blank stare, Ino sighed. If you had shown that jutsu yesterday, you would have passed. Sakura and Hinata looked at each other behind Ino as Naruto grinned, rubbing her head still. Ah well. I didn't know it then, but I did pass. See? Reaching into the collar of her jumpsuit, the girl pulled her normal goggles out, followed by the headband tied around her neck. The three girls stared with their mouths agape for a moment before Sakura and Ino suddenly jumped towards the girl, both of them letting out cries of glee as Naruto struggled to keep her balance. Hinata simply smiled as Sakura and Ino jumped with Naruto in excitement. See? Congratulations, Naruto-chan. The girl muttered quietly, only slightly surprised that Naruto grinned up at her right after, since the other two were being rather loud. So what happened? How did you learn a jutsu like that and pass? Sakura questioned, looking around at the field of Narutos, all of them still seeming to work on something or another. One of them even waved as she looked, earning a slightly nervous wave from Sakura. And they can touch things? I thought clones were just illusions. Naruto grinned and wiggled back from the two hanging onto her arms. Well, I'll tell you what happened, but let's go inside first. I can make you girls some snacks. It better not be ramen. Ino quipped, earning a slight pout from Naruto. Hey, I eat other things, like, Naruto slowly looked to the side, whistling slightly, ignoring the amused looks the girls were giving her. Anyways, my snacks will get cold so. How? You haven't made them yet? Sakura questioned, earning a grin from her blonde friend as a sudden shout came from building behind them. Food's ready! Come on, boss! The girls turned towards the voice, seeing one of the many clones holding a door open to Naruto's home. This one seemed to be slightly different from the rest, not wearing the orange jumpsuit, but rather just a black top and shorts with a white apron over top it. Why is that one dressed differently? Ino questioned, starting to head towards the door as the clone disappeared back inside. Hinata and Sakura followed closely behind, with Naruto in the back with her hands behind her head. Well, I made that one when I got up this morning. The apron is new, but they're physical, so she probably just put it on her own. Naruto explained, shrugging slightly. How long have you even been up? Sakura questioned, looking around slowly at the inside of Naruto's building. The door they went through led them right into one of the apartments. The apartments all had the same basic design with one door heading outside, one to the bathroom, and one towards the bedroom. These, along with an opening to a rather small kitchen area that had no door, were all connected to the main room, which consisted of a large couch and a square table surrounded in chairs. Most of the place seemed to be almost untouched as well, but very clean. There wasn't a speck of dust, but the only real sign of life was the plates resting on the table. For in total that all had a well-cooked piece of meat resting on them along with a glass of water beside each plate. The girls could also see the clone that had called to them standing in the kitchen, seeming to be cleaning the countertop. Naruto hummed as she sat down at one of the chairs, rubbing her chin slightly as she considered Sakura's question. Well, probably a couple of hours. A clone lasted that long? Sakura could hardly believe that. Her regular bunshin only lasted a few minutes, at best. She sighed, taking a seat as well and staring down at the meat on the plate with a slightly amused smile. I thought you said snack, not a meal, It's just one piece. Naruto replied, surprise on her face as she pulled up a knife resting on the table. A meal would be like 10. Ino rolled her eyes, poking the meat on her plate once with her own knife. For you, maybe? Sakura and I have our figures to watch, you know. The Yamanaka instantly regretted her words at the sharp look Hinata and Naruto gave her. Thinking quickly, the heiress decided to change the subject before they could start up their scolding. Well, how did you pass anyways, Goldie? It seemed to work as Naruto blinked twice, humming as she thought of what to tell them. Ah well. When I was hanging out on the swing, Mizuki came up to me, and so she told them of how Mizuki had told her to steal the forbidden scroll of seals and learn one of the jutsu there in order to pass. The first jutsu was Kage Bunshin, a powerful jutsu that split her chakra up, but allowed her to create physical clones that could think and do things she could do. But she also said that the test ended up being a lie, something set up by Mizuki for him to get the scroll himself. Naruto had an annoyed expression as she chewed on the last bit of the meat, saying Gigi said Mizuki was going to be held responsible for it. But that I passed the test since I could make a clone, and I was just following orders anyways. The girls were silent for a short moment before Hinata spoke up, a slight confused expression on her face. I am glad you passed, Naruto-chan, but are you sure he lied? As the others turned towards her, the girl blushed and fidgeted slightly at the sudden attention. Well, Mizuki-sensei is really smart, and you passed, didn't you? I think he knew what would happen. Naruto frowned slightly, chewing a bit more as she stared up at the ceiling. Maybe. The Jinchuriki was silent for a few more moments before smiling at the girls. But enough about that. Is there anything you girls want to do? With my clones around, I can do my housework and anything else I want at the same time. Sakura and Ino looked at each other, both of them grinning widely, which caused the other two to pale slightly as they recognized the mischievous grins. Well, now that you're a ninja, Ino started, standing up with her hands on the table. Sakura followed suit and leaned closer to Naruto, putting their faces rather close to the blonde's own. It's time to do what we've been meaning to do for a long time. Yeah? Naruto gulped slowly, fidgeting slightly. What would that be? The two looked down at her and slowly gripped her shoulders, with Sakura holding her left and Ino holding the right. Simple, little Naruto-chan. Sakura answered, her grin widening. Ino grinned as well while Hinata watched on nervously from the side. We are shopping! Naruto yelled out, staring at the large assortment of clothing that her pink-haired friend was throwing out everywhere from the shopping racks at one of the largest ninja clothing stores. The store was owned by Sakura's mother, and thus the girl was allowed to do practically whatever she wanted in it, so long as she didn't damage the merchandise. The group were all in a large square room with various clothing racks having been pulled inside by Sakura herself for Naruto try-on. Thankfully there was a small changing booth in the room as well, so Naruto was not required to strip in front of the girls. But what she was not thankful for was Ino and Hinata both standing by the door. She had already tried to bolt for it as soon as she saw the store, and would have got away if the girls had not roped Hinata into subduing Naruto. Damn those eyes! Naruto thought, glaring with a pout towards Hinata who had a slightly delighted smile on her face. Stupid Byakugan puppy I know jutsu. Those large lavender orbs quivering and staring at her had made it impossible for Naruto to resist going along with their plans. She now knew what Iruka had to go through whenever she used a similar technique on him for another bowl of ramen. Never again. I'll just beg the normal way. She nodded at the thought, crossing her arms, only to squeak as a large bundle suddenly landed in them. Try those on. Sakura ordered, pointing at her friend. And you said you wanted to keep your goggles, so just tie your hitaite on your arm or something. At Naruto's pout with her lower lip sticking out, Sakura stomped her foot down and pointed at the changing booth. Now, jumping slightly at the sudden shout, Naruto hurriedly ran into the booth, closing the door to it quickly. Ino giggled a bit, leaning back against the wall. Better not think of putting on that orange jacket again either. Hi. Naruto grumbled through the door as Sakura began to put out more outfits, placing each in a different pile. After a while, Naruto peeked her head out of the door, blushing heavily. Do I really have to wear this? It's kind of. Sakura grinned, nodding towards the girl. Yep, now come out and show us. Sighing, Naruto slowly opened the door all the way, revealing the tight black top with fishnet covering the top of her chest and her stomach, leaving her cleavage exposed through the net. Her legs were covered by a pair of tight black pants which had several pockets along the sides, which was a rather standard design for most shinobi pants. The Konoha hitaite was tied around her left arm, being slightly below her shoulder, and her goggles were wrapped around her neck still. Her sandals were still the same, though slightly better versions with a bit of metal on the bottom to allow them to block attacks. Ino and Sakura both clapped with wide smiles as Naruto fidgeted in front of them, poking her fingers together in a very Hinata-like way. Hinata herself was doing the same, staring at Naruto with a slight blush coating her cheeks. Not bad, Goldie. Though I'm definitely jealous of your figure. Ino sighed, but quickly began to smile again as she pushed a second bundle of clothing into Naruto's arms. Now try these, but, no buts. Ino snapped back, pushing the girl back into the changing room. It proceeded in this way for 2 hours with Naruto changing into many different outfits for the girls. A bandage outfit, similar to the outfit Kurenai usually wore as noted by Hinata. A maid outfit, complete with the headpiece which caused Ino to jokingly demand to be served tea. One of the last notable outfits was a one-piece swimsuit that caused Hinata to faint right on the spot with the way it outlined the blonde's body almost perfectly, much to the jealousy of Ino and Sakura. Needless to say, Naruto changed back very quickly. In the end, Sakura bought the first outfit Naruto had tried on, but added in an orange jacket that had pockets on both sides and was able to be worn inside out to hide the orange and replace it with a black similar to the rest of the outfit. Black doesn't really suit me, the blonde whined, pulling a bit at the jacket to look at the black inside as she spun around in it once. But I do really appreciate it, Sakura-chan. Sakura smiled at her as she placed the outfits back onto the rack with the other girls helping out on the other side. Don't thank me for that one. I just got the design into my mom a while ago. But Hinata designed it, and Ino paid for it, Sakura admitted, causing Naruto's eyes to widen as she looked at the three. Just for the jacket. And it was expensive. Ino groaned out, letting out a dramatic sigh. 3 months of my allowance gone. Sakura giggled slightly while Naruto blushed, pulling slightly at the jacket again. Thanks girls. I don't really know how I can repay you. Hinata was the one to speak up this time, smiling softly at Naruto. You've already done a lot for us, Naruto-chan. Naruto gave Hinata a bashful smile, but blinked as Ino suddenly popped in front of her, grinning widely. But if you want to make it up to us. Suddenly the girl was holding up the maid outfit from earlier, causing Naruto to pale slightly. Then I'll be getting this for you too. Naruto blushed heavily, but her face turned a bright crimson as Ino held up the swimsuit, adding I think Hinata-chan wants you to get this one too with a grin across her face. The reaction was instant as Hinata's face burst into a bright red shade, shouting Ino-chan. I-do-n. Hinata jumped as Sakura's hands suddenly went over her mouth from behind and the grinning girl stuck her tongue out slightly. Hear that? She does, so you better be a good friend and wear both of those for us, Sakura said with a slight sing-song voice, causing Naruto to blush further as Hinata struggled against Sakura's grip. Sakura wasn't too strong and it was easy for Hinata to pull away, blushing as Naruto stared at her stumbling away from Sakura. Ino smiled, glancing between the two and holding the outfits up to break their vision. So? What do you say, Naruto-chan? After another few moments of silence, Naruto let out a soft huff and nodded slightly, blushing. Alright, fine. They could come in use, sometime. The bright grin on Ino's face and the large blush Hinata only caused Naruto to blush further herself with her head lowering. She only hoped she wasn't making a mistake. It was a bit later that the girls separated, each going their own way back to their homes. Naruto sighed as she walked along the darkening streets, as the sun had just started to go down in the distance, swinging the bag of clothing around one arm. I've still got clones working, so I should be free to do a few things. But what? She had just finished a rather large prank the other day, and now she was a ninja. Or at least on her way to being one. The next prank would possibly be her last, so it had to be something big. Something so amazing no one would forget. I'll need some help, I think. But who could I even ask? Someone sneaky, like. A sudden idea popped into her head and she grinned, running towards her house and stopping in front of the staircase in the front yard that led to the upper set of apartments. Taking in a deep breath, the girl let out a shout of cat, with her hands cupped around her mouth to add extra volume to it. The result was instant, though not the desired one. Shouts from nearby homes demanded she be silent, others saying something about what cat. Naruto ignored the cries and stared forward with her hands on her hips, waiting. After a few more moments, the girl's eye twitched and she began to take in another deep breath, only for a hand to suddenly go over her mouth as a cloaked woman stood behind her with her chest slightly against the back of Naruto's head. Naruto leaned her head back, grinning against the hand on her mouth as she saw the cat-like image on a white mask the figure wore. I ask that you do not do that again, Uzumaki Naruto. Yugao Yuzuki was what you would call a simple woman. She enjoyed very certain things, such as moon watching, and was a very loyal ninja to Konoha. While her skill did place her at a rather high rank in the ANBU, almost a captain rank, it did not go against her simple desires to serve Konoha, and to live her life the best she could. But there were two constant factors that kept her from enjoying her simple ninja life, and one of them was currently pouring a cup of tea right in front of her. The Uzumaki child was often called the bane of the ANBU because of the constant pressure she put on the group alone. They were used to fighting impossible odds, going through nearly impenetrable castles, and assassinating the enemies of Konoha. Catching a child after the Hokage Tower was flooded by what looked like chocolate bunnies. Not on their list of assignments. Dealing with people constantly trying to harm the same child? Definitely their job, and one Yugao took very seriously until the child began to successfully defend herself. Having to deal with that same child sneaking into their base and drawing all over their prized cloaks like it was a school assignment? Again, not on the list. It kept the ANBU on their toes as they never knew when the child would strike next or cause trouble. In fact, the ANBU have been on high alert since the last incident involving their cloaks. The vents Naruto had went through were on lockdown, and now there were locker checks every half hour. They also keep an eye out for any influx of chocolate in the area. It had taken a week for the genin to scrub the floors, and that was after the ANBU used their Suite and Jutsu to clear it. But now, the girls seemed to be trying a new strategy. Inviting one of the ANBU into her home. which was very simple looking and rather pleasant, if Yugao was honest with herself. At least from the sight of the living room. The backyard had clones running all around it, but they seemed to be fixing up a training field of sorts. It was rather well done too. It still begged the question as to why she was not only called out, but invited in and served tea, which was now sitting in front of her as Naruto poured her own cup, smiling as she set the kettle to the side. Well, it's not the best stuff, but I hope you enjoy it, the girl stated, taking a sip from her cup. Yugao, or Cat as she was called with her mask on, simply nodded and took the cup. Instinctively she released a scanning jutsu that allowed her view the contents for poison and the like. But the tea was safe, just a bit low quality. She took a sip without raising her mask up, earning an odd look from Naruto. Genjutsu, or just a trick? Cat stared at her for a moment before placing the cup down, and Naruto hummed as she sensed a playful smile behind the mask. Both. My previous captain taught it to me. Ah, Kakashi as her captain. Those were the days. I appreciate the drink, Uzumaki-san, but why did you request my presence? Naruto clicked her tongue slightly, placing her own cup back on the table. You don't have to be so formal, but... She hummed thoughtfully, running her finger along the rim of her cup. I guess first I want to apologize for painting everyone's cloaks. No. Naruto waved her hand dismissively, a playful grin on her face. I didn't even do yours, and that was intended. I'm not sorry for it. But... Yugao blinked behind her mask as the young girl in front of her blushed, scratching her cheek slightly. Well, I'm sorry for seeing you and your friend like. Well, you know. Now it was Yugao's turn to blush, though she was thankful her mask kept Naruto from noticing. Letting out a slight cough, the woman said, well, it was mostly our fault for doing it in the first place, so I forgive you. Although, I will not forgive it a second time. The warning was said with a bit more of a meek voice than she would have liked, and Naruto in response just pouted slightly. Ah, that's a shame. She had a playful smile on her face that reminded Yugao a bit of Anko, though the rose-colored blush that was spread across the young blonde's face kept Yugao assured Anko had no influence on the child. It would take less than a week for flirty comments like that to cause no more embarrassment than breathing, if Anko was involved. But still, calling her over only to apologize? It was too good to be true. Was that all you wanted, Uzumaki-san? She wondered briefly if the seat she was sitting on was trapped or something, but dismissed the idea. It would have already went off, if there was one. Naruto hummed for a moment before shaking her head slightly. No, I didn't call you over just to apologize for that. I also want your help. That was a new one. My help? Nodding, Naruto gave her a foxy grin, brushing a strand of hair over her shoulder. Yep. See, I know I'm going to be busy soon with training and dealing with ninja stuff. But I want one last prank. One really big one. I've got plenty of ideas, but all of them seem too small. Naruto bit her lip in a rather cute way, tapping a bit on the edge of her cup with her finger. So I want your help to figure out what to do. Yugao simply stared at the girl, almost unable to believe what she was hearing. The number one prankster was asking for help on not only figuring out a prank, but if she was right, she was also asking for help on doing the prank. Such a thing could cost her position in the NBU. Her simple life, but... A voice purred in her head, one brought together by the torment of the blonde in front of her, and the constant pull of her best friend who dragged her along several crazy adventures. It'll be fun, and you know exactly what kind of prank she could do. Besides, it helps the NBU. Did it? Yugao wasn't sure, but she continued to let herself stare at Naruto rather than outright refusing like her gut was telling her to. To help the girl play a prank on the village, and possibly even the NBU itself, would almost be treason, depending on the contents. Of course, the Hokage would probably let her off pretty easily if she was found out to be involved, but she was absolutely certain everyone she worked with would think she had been involved all of the other times a prank had gone bad. Naruto squirmed at the silence in the room, letting out a slight cough and rubbing the back of her head right after. Oh, of course you don't have to, and I don't plan on telling anyone you helped if you do. Unless you wanted me to or Gigi told me to. That last remark about the Hokage did have Yugao smiling a bit. It was nice to know she cared about authority after all. But, what kind of prank would she even request from the girl? One that could help the NBU, of course, but, wait, help the NBU, very well. The words were coming out of Yugao's mouth before she even registered them, leaning down slightly as Naruto's eyes widened. I have an idea you could do. Get some paper out. The girl scrambled to her feet, quickly taking out a piece of paper and a pen from what Yugao suspected was her bedroom. The girl quickly took a seat again, sliding the paper over to Yugao at her request. She hesitated for a moment, before slowly beginning to draw. Alright, first. The next day, during the night, Naruto gulped slightly as she walked through the dark halls she had been instructed to infiltrate, wearing the outfit Sakura had bought for her just yesterday. The only difference was that now Naruto had on a black mask around her face, hiding her hair as well with a careful hinge. Alright, it has to be around here somewhere. The girl muttered to herself, mentally wondering how she was able to see almost perfectly without any light source, but once again she dismissed it. The mission was the important thing right now, not her strange abilities. After a few more moments of walking, the blonde stopped in front of a small curve in the wall on her left, causing her to smirk a bit. Here we go. If Kat-chan was right then. She pushed on the curve and was delighted as the wall seemed to push away from her before a small section of it suddenly shot up. On the other side of the door was another small hallway, similar to two others Naruto had passed on her way. The girl bent down and pulled an alarm seal off the floor, which had been carefully colored in to match the black tiles, but Kat had told her what to look for. The alarm seal also only went off if someone over the front of it where the seal itself was located, so flipping the paper over effectively disabled the seal. Which was a pretty bad oversight, if Naruto was honest. What use were they if they only detected chakra in front of them? Shaking her head, Naruto created a single clone and nodded towards it. You know what to do. Keep going down until you find another door. The clone nodded and obeyed, beginning to walk away quickly but silently down the hall Naruto had originally been going down. The original Naruto went past the door she had opened, being careful not to touch the seal she flipped any further, and smiled as the door closed behind her. She continued along until the hallway turned to the right where she could see light peeking through, and she gulped a bit nervously as she put her back to the corner, looking over it once. As Kat had described, the hallway had a large vent along the floor where light was coming from, and above the vent was a series of tubes and pipes that all opened up towards the vent itself, with several of the pipes going straight into the wall on each side of the hallway. But the main problem was what the vent was covering, and what exactly it was revealed. Nervously, Naruto lowered herself down and crawled across the ground, only stopping as she reached the edge of the vent, and stared right into the ANBU shower room. Because the ANBU were a secret organization for Konoha, a majority of their members were given public assignments that made them appear to be outside of Konoha itself. The only real exceptions to the rule had mostly quit being an ANBU altogether, such as Uchiha Itachi and Kakashi Hatake, who both had openly public lives. But because they weren't supposed to be in Konoha, the ANBU were unable to live in a regular house or walk around with villagers like other ninja did. This caused an underground living quarters to be built for the remaining ANBU for when they needed rest, or when they were given days off, which wasn't often, but still, because of the nature of the ANBU, a majority of them were still very alert and awake at night, but some of them also returned on the cover of night from missions in order to hide that they had left in the first place. The end result had Naruto staring down at several men and women showering at the same time, about 3 men and 4 women, one of which was Kat herself, which caused Naruto to blush as she felt her eyes lock on to the sight of the purple-haired woman's rear dripping water. It was astounding that Kat had been the one to suggest the path, but she supposed it was not only a safety precaution in case she was caught, but also to get the best results. If Kat was the only ANBU not to be affected by Naruto's prank, then people would suspect her. That couldn't be allowed, but this also meant Kat was giving Naruto permission to see her naked body a second time. While Naruto was a bit too young to understand what exactly she felt, and much too uninformed, it still left the girl licking her lips slowly with desire. Move! The sudden voice almost made her jump, but she kept herself in check, shivering slightly as the voice spoke again. You have a mission! Move! You can ogle her later. You're on a time limit. Naruto gulped, nodding to her own thoughts as she put her fingers up. Unconsciously, Naruto began to lower her chakra levels at an amazing rate as she transformed herself into a small rat, which allowed her to run along the vent bars quickly without having the threat of one of the ANBU randomly looking up to see her. At the end of the vent, Rituto gave Kat's rear another glance before she scurried further down the hall, transforming back to normal a few moments later. After a bit more walking, the girl grinned wide to herself as she finally reached her target. A large wooden door with a single gold handle. A large "Keep Out" sign was printed on it, but the girl paid it no mind as she pulled the alert seals off the door frame on both sides. Carefully, the girl opened the door, and instantly began to grip her head in pain as a rush of memories began to invade her skull. Images of a dark room, filled with hundreds of bodies all piled together with masks covering their faces. Children. Bloody messages across the walls, each saying something around failure, hopeless, too attached to emotion, and a very small one that simply said mommy with the tail end of the Y dragging down, as if the writer had fallen. Naruto could feel bile rising in her throat, but she felt her own hand clasp around her mouth as the last bit of memories pulsed into her head. A child, holding its hand out to her, with dark green eyes staring deep into her own. Surrounded in the bodies of other children. Naruto could see herself, or at least her clone self, reaching out to grab the hand. When it suddenly went limp, just an inch away from her fingertips, and the child's head turned to the side with blood leaking from his eyes and mouth. The clone had promptly dispelled itself not only to warn its creator, but to escape the pain. It took all of Naruto's willpower, and the constant shouting of the inner voice in her head to focus to keep the bile down in her throat. She could feel her hand pushing hard on the ground while the other held tightly onto her own mouth. She could feel the ground under her fingers beginning to make small holes in the ground, curving as she curled her fingers. Focus, you idiot! Get sick later. Your mission. Stay in control. Naruto nodded in agreement with her inner voice, gulping down the bile that gathered and slowly pushing herself to her feet. Wordlessly, the girl made a Kage Bunshin and waved it slightly, not wanting to see the clone's own pained expression as it felt everything she did. The clone was created to replace the one that destroyed itself, to redo the seals and prevent anyone from noticing she had went down that way. Surprisingly, the clone did not follow her mental orders to fix the seals the dispelled clone had forgotten to redo, but wrapped her arms around the original. Naruto shivered and returned the gesture, holding the clone close before patting it softly on the back. "Thank you. But get going," she muttered softly, getting a nod from the clone who turned itself into a rat and began to scurry off the way Naruto came. Slowly, the blonde got to her feet once more and looked around at the room she had managed to get into before the memories had invaded her. In front of her was a large collection of pipes and machines which spread across the entire room, excluding the door where Naruto came from, all of which connected to the entire water supply of Konoha, though it was not the main filter, but merely a large part of it. Shuddering slightly and shaking off the last bit of sorrow that gripped her heart, Naruto pulled a yellow bottle out of her pocket and got to work. It was about an hour later that a round piece of the earth began to lift itself up somewhere in the Konoha forest. Soon after, a blonde girl pulled herself out, panting slightly as she crawled away from the opening which lowered itself down after she left it. After a few moments of panting, the girl let out a loud gagging sound as she emptied the contents of her stomach at last with tears streaming down her face slowly. The blonde was glad the opening was near a stream as well, as she wasted no time in crawling over to the small stream and splashing herself in the face several times. It took a few more moments for her to catch her breath before she rose to her feet, panting and shaking her head. Naruto took a deep breath to calm herself and shook her head, feeling her hands slowly clench into fists. As her mind allowed her to get in touch with all the emotions she had back in the tunnels, she could feel her disgust, her sorrow, and most importantly, her rage. It was an insult, a horrible insult to life to see so many children killed, and yet not a damn thing is said about it. For someone like Naruto who was treated as a demon for something she had no knowledge about, for doing such minor things like painting a few walls, she was treated like a monster. But this was beyond what a monster was capable of, yet no one was treated like her. It was impossible that literally no one had noticed it before. Someone had to have put them there, for one, and this was supposed to be Konoha? A place where they hid the corpses of many children down below, because they were failures for some twisted game? Did the Hokage know? If he did, no, he doesn't know. Gigi would not let something like that happen. Naruto reasoned with herself, though it did nothing to stop the fury in her heart. I have to tell him. And Cat too, consequences be damned. I'll find whoever the hell did that and… With a sudden movement, Naruto's fist slammed into the nearest tree, causing the bark to crack and groan in irritation at suddenly being struck. But Naruto did not apologize as her eyes flashed red, and she did not turn back as the tree she struck began to lean slightly away from where it had been hit. I'll kill them, Naruto huffed as she walked up to her home, debating on going straight into the apartment she usually lived in or… Her body made the choice before her mind considered it, and she found herself opening the square attachment to the building that led to the previous landlord's office. It was rather small, about the size of most of the bedrooms, with a single small bed in the far left corner. A large desk was on the far right corner facing the door with various papers scattered across it, none of which were too relevant anymore except for some papers claiming Naruto as the owner of the buildings, and a large armchair resting behind it against the wall. There were no windows in the room. Naruto closed the door behind her, locked it, and then pulled the blanket off the bed, sliding into the armchair. She pulled open two drawers on the desk, starting by pulling out a small lamp which she placed on top of the desk itself. The lamp had a round base and a small orb on the top of the pole holding it up, but it was fairly small since it had to sit inside her desk. Placing her hand on the base, Naruto sent a small jolt of chakra through it which caused the lamp to light up, although it would only remain lit for a limited amount of time. In truth, Naruto knew she didn't even need the lamp, since she could see almost perfectly in the dark, but the light helped clear her head. The blonde moved slightly and pulled a manga out from the second drawer she opened, flipping it open to the page she left off of which was marked by a thin white feather. I can't sleep, so I guess I'll just read all night. It was a reasonable thing to do. With the rage bubbling in her heart, the girl wasn't quite up to go to bed like she originally planned, and had no desire to pound away her frustrations just yet. That would come after the talk with the Hokage. Plus, she had nearly reached the end of the arc she was currently on, and had already completed copying the technique down from it. The next arc probably has something interesting I can try to learn, Naruto thought to herself, trying to keep herself distracted as she squirmed in her chair. But despite her best efforts to stay awake and read, the soft comedy of the manga began to make her relax in her seat. It didn't take long for her to begin to doze off, laying against the arm of the chair while her hand held loosely onto the manga on the final page. The light of the lamp slowly dimmed, and darkness took the room. The next day, it was rather early in the morning that Naruto found herself being jolted awake by the door opening quickly. She blinked drowsily up at the figure in her doorway as she lifted her sore neck off the arm of her chair. Wa. Before she could really react, 2ENBU were standing in front of her desk as she rubbed her eyes slowly. Uzumaki-san. That voice was definitely Kat's, and looking up revealed that it was, in fact, Kat who was talking to her. The other one, at a glance, had a rabbit mask and seemed to be hanging back slightly from the other, wearing his cloak a bit over his head to hide his hair. Naruto remained silent as she stared up at Kat with half-opened eyes, letting the woman continue. Hokage-sama wishes to speak to you over some matters before you go on to meet your team. Blinking olishly, Naruto nodded slowly and sighed as she picked up her fallen book on the ground, placing it back into her drawer. Will I be gone long? I kinda planned on taking a shower first. Naruto questioned as she stood up, smiling as Kat shook her head. No, it should only take a short amount of time, unless something else comes up. You have a few hours before meeting your team. Naruto nodded, taking Kat's hand as the woman held it out. The two stepped outside with Rabbit following, closing the door behind them, before the three disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Sarutobi Hiruzen wasn't quite sure how he felt at the moment. In front of him was his favorite grandchild, wiggling back and forth in her chair while staring at him with her bright blue eyes full of curiosity. Behind her stood Kat, one of his most faithful ANBU and the one who had watched over Naruto for quite some time, though only when she was a young child. So it was understandable that she requested she be nearby during this meeting, but in a way it made it harder for him to admit his failure. Naruto seemed to understand his distress as well, as she suddenly stood up and pulled at her jacket, grinning at him. Hey Gigi! Look! The girls got me a new outfit. She spun once, letting the jacket fly up slightly before she stopped, facing the Hokage once more. So now I've got something else to wear. Hiruzen chuckled softly, placing his chin on his hands as he smiled. I can see that. It looks very nice on you, Naruto-chan. You look like a real kunoichi. This caused the blonde to blush prettily, scratching her cheek. Why? You think so? Indeed. Why, I thought I was dealing with a young jounin when you first walked in. The old Hokage teased, causing the girl's face to light up even more. Oh hush, Gigi. She muttered with a soft smile on her face, sitting back down in her chair. So what did you call me up here for? It's pretty early. In an instant, Hiruzen's smile fell and he let out a soft, tired sigh. Well, this is not easy to say, Naruto-chan. Naruto stared at him with her head tilted, but suddenly shot up with her eyes widening. There isn't a shortage on ramen, is there? I swear I'll. Hiruzen held his hands up, chuckling softly while Kat palmed her mask behind Naruto, earning a slight pout from the girl as she glanced back at her. What? What did I say? Nothing. Kat answered with a quiet voice, waving her hand slightly. Just let the Hokage speak. Naruto let out a humph but sat back down, crossing her arms over her chest. The professor chuckled a bit more, before letting out another soft sigh. Thank you, Naruto-chan. You do make it easy to relax. The girl grinned at that, leaning back in her chair as Hiruzen continued. But what I have to talk to you about is an S-rank secret. That involves you. She blinked a couple times, a joke about her ramen recipe on her tongue, but the hard stare she got from the Hokage held her back as he stood up. You recall the horror that befell our village so many years ago, Naruto? You were just an infant at the time, but I know it. Naruto clenched her fists, chewing a bit on her lip as she spoke. How could I not? I'm reminded of it every time my birthday comes up. The day the Kyuubi attacked Konoha. That day was always dark for Naruto, and she often spent it locked in her house or with the Hokage himself. It always hurt when her friends asked why she had not attended the festival, and she was unable to tell them that she had been nearly beaten the last time she tried. Hiruzen smiled sadly at her, nodding his head as he turned and walked towards the large window in the room, staring out at the village below. Then you know that the Kyuubi was thought to be destroyed by the Yondaime, who gave his life for it. He did not need to look to know the girl nodded. That was, after all, the primary point of the story. That was not the complete truth, Hiruzen admitted, turning around to look at the young child he had grown to care for. She was simply staring at him, her head tilted to the side and curiosity stretched across her face. In truth, the beast was too strong to be destroyed. It could only be sealed. There was a brief pause as Hiruzen watched the emotions fly across Naruto's face, going through surprise, sadness, and finally into shock as she slowly swallowed. Why? You don't mean? The great Hokage merely stared at her silently as she slowly pointed at herself. Me? He sealed it in me? Slowly, the man nodded, his frown growing as Naruto leaned back in her chair with her mouth hanging open and shock clear on her face. He decided to simply continue his explanation. There was no other way, I'm afraid. You were the only child born on that day, and your blood as an Uzumaki was merely an extra boon for it. Only the Uzumaki clan were able to hold such a powerful creature at bay, including in their own bodies. Naruto could not help but fall back into her chair, unable to really process what she was being told. She had the Kyuubi, the most powerful of the tailed beasts, sealed within her, and that was why everyone treated her like crap. Because of something I had no control over. They'd all be dead if I wasn't born that day, but they treat me like I was the Kyuubi. She kept the anger off her face, but she could feel it bubbling beneath the surface. But then she realized what else Hiruzen had said, and Naruto sat up a bit more, staring at the man she viewed as a grandfather with wide eyes. Clan? I have a clan? There was hope in her voice, a sort of longing that gripped at the Hokage's heart like ice. He smiled bitterly, staring out the window once more with his hands behind his back. It seemed he would have to chat with the school advisors as well, if they were skipping over the Uzumaki history without informing him. Yes, you did. But I am afraid you may be the only one left. He did not turn his gaze to see her hurt expression, and instead continued to focus on the village below. The Uzumaki were an amazing clan and even had their own hidden village where they lived. It was called Yuzushiyogakure, village hidden by whirling tides, located in the land of whirlpools. It was there they lived, and fell. Naruto licked her lips, gulping down the sorrow that was threatening to overtake her. She shivered slightly as she felt Kat place a hand on her shoulder, and she gripped it with her own hand, smiling thankfully up at her. Turning her gaze back to her grandfather, she had only one question. How? Hiruzen hesitated before answering, letting out a soft sigh. They were targeted by 3 separate factions all at once. I'm afraid it was never said exactly who was involved, though IWA is a prime suspect, but they were viewed as too dangerous during the war because of their natural talent in sealing techniques. The one that holds the Kyuubi at bay is one of theirs as well. Naruto gulped slightly again, nodding her head. I guess it runs in the family. At Hiruzen's questioning stare, Naruto smiled bitterly herself, staring down at the ground. Being hated, for what we could do, rather than what we have done. Hiruzen's eyes widened slightly before he relaxed, smiling sadly himself as he saw the truth in the child's words. Slowly, he knelt down in front of Naruto, smiling softly at her as he saw the tears running down her whiskered cheeks. I do not hate you, Naruto-chan. And I do not believe Kat does either. Nor your friends. Kat nodded firmly, kneeling down as well with her hands still resting on Naruto's shoulder. Do not fret, little one. The woman muttered softly, rubbing Naruto's hair with her free hand, casually fixing the loop that held the ponytail together. You merely need to shine brighter for them to see the true you. The one you want them to see. Those were words Itachi had once said to her, back when he had been the captain of her squad at a young age. Before he went crazy, Naruto nodded slightly, sniffing a bit as the Hokage rose up, heading back to his desk and picking up one scroll off of it. It was dark blue with a spiral for a latch to hold it closed. He placed it gently on Naruto's lap, smiling down at her. This is a scroll from your clan. It contains several of their jutsu and their basic fighting style. There are more, but I'm afraid I promised I would not give them to you until you were at least a chunin. Naruto gratefully took the scroll, smiling a bit. Thank you, Gigi. But who did you promise that? Your mother. The man replied easily, earning a wide-eyed look from Naruto as the man sat down on the edge of his desk. It was on her deathbed, after the Kyuubi had been sealed into you. She said it was up to me to give them to you or not, but that she'd prefer you obtained all she had to offer after you were at least chunin. If you'd like, I can give them all to you now, but it'd be going against her last wishes. Naruto finished, sighing gently. May I at least know her name? Hiruzen hesitated, glancing at Kat, before shrugging slightly yes. Her name was Uzumaki Kushina, a proud S-ranked jounin of Konoha. I asked that you keep that information to yourself, however, because she had many enemies. But she was one of the few that could fight the yandame to a standstill, even with his Hiration. Kat stiffened slightly beside Naruto, knowing exactly who that was herself, but Naruto paid it no mind as she smiled to herself. She finally knew one of her parents. Or at least their name. Her mother had even fought evenly with the yandame. And once I'm chunin, I'll get to know more about my clan too. I'll have to work really hard to become even stronger than she was. Hiruzen could not help but chuckle as he saw clench her fist with determination in her eyes, staring intently at the scroll he had given her. There is one last thing to discuss, Naruto. Regarding the seal. Naruto looked up at him just as the door snapped open and a young blonde chunin was standing there with his arm outstretched in the action of opening the door. Hokage-sama! He cried out, his brown eyes full of panic and his blonde hair shimmer slightly from the light. I do believe I said I didn't want any disturbances while in this meeting. The professor noted, frowning at the blonde at the door. I don't believe I know you either. I can't recall anyone with that shade of hair. Which was a slight lie, as the blonde girl he was just speaking to had the same shade. The chunin's face was also slightly familiar, but that's because I don't usually have this hair color, Hokage-sama. The man explained, moving closer to his leader's desk. It's because of something strange in the water. We've got various complaints from multiple houses all over the village, and a majority of our ninja forces over the same thing. Hiruzen frowned, slowly looking over at Naruto who was staring out the window, purposely not meeting his gaze. The Hokage noted that Kat was doing the same, being back in her position behind Naruto's chair. The professor resisted the urge to sigh, and instead turned his gaze back to the chunin. And what complaints are those? The chunin pointed at his hair, frowning. Everyone is getting blonde hair, Hokage-sama. There was silence in the room as the Hokage considered what the man was saying, but could not hold back a laugh as he imagined Kakashi with blonde hair. The surprised, and slightly annoyed, look the chunin gave him caused him to pull back his laughter, though he could not keep the smile off his face. Is that so? Is it harmful? The man shook his head. No one has reported being in pain because of it, Hokage-sama, except for their eyes. Hiruzen raised his eyebrow slightly as Naruto snickered a bit, though she covered it up by quickly scratching her cheek. Their eyes? The man nodded. Yes, there are complaints of people having pain in their eyes from seeing so many blonde heads in one place. The tone of his voice indicated the man was amused by it, but his face remained in a neutral frown, probably because he was a victim as well. I see. Hiruzen chuckled softly, nodding his head. I will deal with it soon. You are dismissed. Hi! With that, the Chunin saluted and exited the room, closing the door behind him. Hiruzen turned his gaze down to Naruto, smiling at her with amusement clear on his face. Do you have something to tell me, Naruto-chan? The blonde just grinned slightly, letting out a "Nuh?" Why would I? Suddenly, her grin fell as images flashed through her mind and her hands gripped her legs with her gaze turning to the ground, surprising the other two. Actually, yeah. I do. Hiruzen frowned at the girl's expression, lowering himself slightly so they were at the same level. What happened, Naruto-chan? The girl looked up at him, and he was briefly taken back by the level anger in her eyes. I have a question first. Do you? Naruto paused, thinking of the best way to word her question. Do you think being attached to emotion makes you a failure? Hiruzen's eyes widened at the question and he frowned, slowly shaking his head. No. Casting away emotion only makes one weak. And less than human. There was, of course, one person he knew that did think that emotions were a weakness. But he never agreed with that man, and personally saw to it that he did not influence others to think in a similar way. Naruto seemed to accept his answer, nodding slightly. Good. I'm glad. She seemed to relax a bit in her chair, turning her gaze back downward. I went through the underground tunnels for the latest prank, to get at the water supply and a few other things. The Hokage gave her a surprised look and looked up towards Kat, although he arched his eyebrow as the woman seemed to be focused completely on Naruto's form. It seems she's feeling guilty about something. Hiruzen decided to question her later, and instead focused on Naruto. How did you get into the tunnels? I found an opening near the northeast of the village, a bit past the academy. The blonde admitted, keeping her gaze downward. It was then that Kat spoke up, putting her hand on Naruto's head. That is incorrect. Hokage-sama, I freely admit to have assisted Uzumaki-san in this assignment. Both of them looked up at her in surprise, but she ignored their looks as she kept speaking. I told her of the tunnel's entrance, and what she could find there. She handled piecing together what she could do that would be both harmless and very obvious. See, Kat. The blonde snapped, huffing slightly. I thought you said you didn't want to be associated with it. I don't. But only to my peers. The Hokage needs to be informed and I need to take responsibility for anything that may have hurt you down there. The last part was said at a whisper, but it was not lost on the other two. Naruto merely stared at her with wide eyes while Hiruzen gave a slight smile. It seems you care for Naruto-chan quite a bit, Kat. He chuckled as he imagined the blush underneath the woman's mask. But why did you assist in this one, and have you assisted in any others? Kat shook her head slightly before answering. No, I haven't. I barely helped in this one as well. She said she wasn't sure what to do, because all the ones she made up were too small. I suggested she use the tunnels, in order to get more attention on them. My captain has declined me requesting to speak to you about it multiple times, and I figured this was the best and easiest way. Oh? That was news to the Hokage. Even if a request was declined, the papers still made their way to him so he could review them himself. If he was receiving no papers at all, that meant the captain of Kat's squad was purposely keeping his eyes off those tunnels. Turning his gaze back to Naruto, he gently took the girl's hand to help her relax. Why don't you explain to me what you saw, Naruto? From start to finish. The blonde slowly nodded, taking in a deep breath before she began. Well, I went to the tunnel entrance Kat gave me and began to go down it for a bit. I kept making clones to go down the hidden doors, which were super easy to find, by the way. I mean, she rolled her eyes slightly. A curve in the wall in a mostly straight hallway is pretty obvious when you can see in the dark. See in the dark? Kat repeated, frowning as Naruto pointed at her eyes. Yeah, I can see almost perfectly in the dark, so I didn't need a light. Kinda always been like that. She hummed, ignoring the look the other two shared during her pause. Anyways, I followed the map Kat drew me, though I burned it before I went down, and kept going through doors. The alarm seals were super easy to get past, too. You can just turn them over and they're useless. Hiruzen frowned at that, thinking the tunnels had been a bit more guarded than that. At least from what he was told. She waved her hand slightly. It was about, probably an hour in that I came across the final set of doors before it looped around. I went down the one that led to the ANBU showers while my clone kept going down the hallway past that. She gulped slowly, gripping her legs again. And then I saw it. Hiruzen frowned as he felt the anger building up inside Naruto, and he gently rubbed her hand with his own. Calm yourself. What did you see? The blonde took a deep breath to calm herself with one of her hands gripping Hiruzen's own. The clone I sent forward found a room full of bodies. Dead bodies. Children. The Hokage kept the shock off his face, and instead continued to have his concerned expression as he held Naruto's hand. The walls had writing on them, calling them failures for having emotions. She sniffed once, tears beginning to form in her eyes as she shook slightly. One reached towards me. He was still alive, but... She shook her head, feeling Kat's hands on her shoulders, which did help steady her emotions somewhat. He died right as I was about to grab him. There was blood coming out of his mouth and eyes. The room fell silent as Naruto sniffed, and slowly Hiruzen stood up, walking back behind his desk. I see. I am sorry that you had to find that, Naruto-chan. But I am also thankful. Naruto looked up at her grandfather, and could not keep the surprise off her face as she saw the normally peaceful-looking Hokage have an anger-filled expression as he looked out the window. It alarms me that such a tragedy was taking place. Rest assured, I will find who is responsible, and I will punish them accordingly. Naruto smiled at that, nodding her head. Thank you, Hokage-sama. She sniffed once, rubbing her eyes slightly. Hiruzen smiled slightly, knowing the girl did greatly appreciate it if she was referring to him as Hokage. I have 2 questions, however. She blinked at that, looking back up at Hiruzen as he took a seat back behind his desk. The first is if you wish for a Yamanaka to erase the memory of those children from your mind. Such a thing would be very dangerous, especially for the Yamanaka. But seeing such a horrible sight could leave a heavy impression on one's mind, and Hiruzen knew there were some things better left forgotten. The answer was instant, and honestly the one he expected. No! She shouted, slamming her hands down on his desk as she stood. I refuse. I can't forget him. I won't forget him. I'm the only one that saw his last moments. Hiruzen stared at her, glancing at his desk as a small wet spot appeared on it from Naruto's tears. I won't let myself forget that. So they aren't just forgotten, fodder for some sick game. Her words brought a small smile to his face, and he found himself nodding in agreement with her. Yes, I agree that is the best choice. We should not forget the fallen, no matter how young. I will make sure the one responsible is taken care of. Naruto nodded sharply at that, though her gaze made him a tad nervous with the anger at the blue orbs held. He cleared his throat slightly, leaning back in his chair. The second question is, would you and Kat like a long-term A-rank mission? This got wide stares from the two, though he only noticed Kat's due to years of dealing with those masks. It is a simple mission, one you can do at your own pace, but it is very important. I am not sure Uzumaki-san should do such a mission when she is just starting to be a genin. Kat pointed out, earning a soft chuckle from her leader. It is something she has been doing for many years now, Kat. He smiled a bit wider as Naruto tilted her head, her tears forgotten. As you have proven time and time again. We are too lax in our security. Not only that, but it seems we have people on the inside trying to strike us as well. The man leaned forward, clasping his hands together slightly and resting his chin on them. What I am requesting is that you, Kat, find any holes in our security and inform Naruto here. Then, Naruto, you will preform a prank in order to alert everyone to it. Much like you have been doing already. I agree with this idea, Kat stated, standing beside Naruto now in front of the Hokage's desk. I have tried to inform you of breaks in our security multiple times with my captain refusing each time to allow it. It was only when Uzumaki-san started her pranks that I ceased, since she did my job for me. Hiruzen chuckled slightly, looking over at Naruto who had a thoughtful expression on her face. I suppose I could try, but what about my team? And missions? She frowned, staring at him. I just became a genin. I don't know if I'll have time for that. You have the Kage-bunshin, do you not? Hiruzen pointed out, causing Naruto's eyes to widen slightly. Again, this mission is best to be left to you two at your own pace, and I do not want it interfering with any training or missions either of you have. But if both of you could spare a Kage-bunshin from time to handle this request, I will make sure any notes you make are handled accordingly, and that you are paid for your work. He turned his gaze towards Kat, nodding slightly. In regards to this, I will give you, Kat, an official title as security manager if you accept this mission. You will have full freedom to any building in Konoha and access to any supplies you may need. So long as none of these pranks are harmful, you have permission to go as far as you wish with them. I trust neither of you will abuse this power I am giving you. The two girls looked at each other before turning their gaze back to him, nodding, though it was Kat that spoke up first. Yes, Hokage-sama. We will not abuse this power, and use E. She paused, shaking her head. Naruto-san and I will not betray your trust. Would you like a report of what actions we took after a prank is complete? Hiruzen chuckled, nodding his head and smiling at the way Naruto's face lit up when Kat called her Naruto, rather than the formal Uzumaki-san. Yes. You may submit a request so I can take care of any fallout a prank may have. I would like written reports as well, but for now. What exactly did you do for this one, Naruto-chan? The blue eyes that held so much anger just a moment ago lit up as she began to go over the details of her prank. Well, it's a really special dye I made myself with a bunch of flowers and some actual dye. It's fast-acting and mixes well with water, so no one could see it. But it's also edible and non-toxic, that way no one got hurt by it. Kinda tastes like a strawberry though. She hummed slightly to herself, while Hiruzen gave her an amused expression. How long does it last? About a day, give or take. I also didn't hit every house with it. She grinned a bit. I mostly focused on ninja houses, and I skipped over a couple friends like Sakura-chan. I wouldn't want to mess with her pink hair. The Hokage chuckled softly, nodding. I see. That is very well thought out, Naruto-chan. Are you under the effect of the dye as well, cat? The question caused the purple-haired woman to flinch slightly before she nodded. Yes, I am using a genjutsu to keep my hair normal. I expect many of the Chunin or above shinobi will be doing the same. I'm immune since it's the same shade as my hair. Now Biki won't be able to snag me for it by finding some of my hair. Naruto grinned, sticking her tongue out a bit. Chuckling, the Hokage nodded slightly. I suppose that's true. Now, I understand you are meeting your team today, so I should not keep you any longer. Thank you for the information you found, and thank you for the laugh. He turned his gaze towards Kat as Naruto grinned widely. Kat, escort Naruto-chan home and then return here so we may fill out your new position. Hi, Hokage-sama. Kat responded, placing her hand on Naruto's shoulder, who smiled as she felt the woman's chakra beginning to wrap around her. Be sure to let me get a shot in on that guy when you find him. The blonde shouted out, right as the two disappeared in a swirl of leaves. Hiruzen smiled until the two were completely gone, a frown appearing soon after. Danzo, if you are truly the one behind this, then I have no more desire to protect you. Your ideals have gone too far and have taken innocent life. He lowered his head slightly, staring down at the papers on his desk. If it is truly you, Danzo, then I will have no choice but to end you myself. I have ignored too many mistakes in my lifetime, and I will not allow my village to be harmed by another. Later. Sometime around noon, Naruto yawned slightly as she made her way through the front doors of the academy, smiling a bit to herself as she put her hands behind her head. She was dressed back in the outfit the girls had got for her, including the jacket which was zipped up to cover her chest with the orange side on the out. She also had a dark blue kunai pouch, where she kept several tools to use. She still had her hair back in a ponytail as well, deciding that the pigtail she used to wear all the time was best left behind in the academy. It was also a bit more manageable, but she also didn't want to get slapped in the face by one of her clones running by her. And since she could make over 100 of them without even trying, well, maybe it'd be a good attack. Uzumaki's spinning jutsu, she playfully thought to herself, grinning as she spun once before entering the usual classroom where everyone was supposed to be gathering, which they were, as she could tell from first glance at the numerous genin she knew all sitting at their usual desks, with Ino and Sakura waving at her as she entered. Everyone was there that she could see except Irika, and none of them were sporting blonde hair at first glance. Sadly, that included Sasuke, who she did target, but she figured he was either using a genjutsu, or he didn't wash himself, at least not using water from the pipes. She began to scan the class for those that did get hit and, "Hey, Goldie!" the blonde called out, distracting Naruto from her scanning. She grinned over at her friend and took 2 steps towards her before jumping forward, placing her foot on the lowest desk where Naro Shikamaru was sitting with his head down. Thankfully for the Nara, Naruto didn't step right on his head this time, but right beside it instead. A quick jump up put her 2 levels higher, and she smiled up at Ino, who sat beside Sakura in the final set of desks, 1 level above her, near the windows. The girl sat on the edge of the desk, facing the 2 girls, rather than facing the front of the classroom. "Hey, Ino-chan, Sakura-chan!" Naruto called out, turning her head to her left and grinning at Hinata, who was already seated beside Naruto. "And Hinata-chan, of course." Hinata smiled and nodded in greeting, seeming a little out of it. Before Naruto could become concerned, however, Sakura spoke up. "Hey Naruto, what did you do? I've heard a lot of people complaining about you today." There was a bit of suspicion in her voice, but there was an amused smile as well. Repressing a grin, Naruto gave it her best to have a confused expression on her face with her head tilted to the side. "Me? I just got up a bit ago, took a shower, collected a bunch of stuff for today." She suddenly perked up, smiling brightly. "Oh yeah. And I found out I had a clan. Gigi told me." This caused the girls to look at her in shock, and below her on the second set of desks, Sasuke glanced back curiously as well, with Kiba sitting beside him with his legs propped up. Sakura was the first to recover, and as someone who read a lot of books, it sounded strange that she had never heard of an Uzumaki clan before. "You did? I've never heard of the Uzumaki clan," Sakura admitted, voicing her own thoughts. Naruto nodded slightly, not noticing Irika entering the room as she spoke. "Yeah. I was surprised too. They apparently had their own village called Yuzushiogakyur. But," she frowned, sighing slightly, "they were all killed before I was even born, apparently. Sometime during the war is what Gigi said." "Oh no," Ino whispered, frowning. It had been great news to hear Naruto finally had a family to call her own. But they were all dead? That meant even though she had a family, she was the last one now. Naruto suddenly smiled, however, despite the depressing mood the conversation had went. "But isn't it great? I had a clan. And that means I can learn about them. Her smile grew wider, and the girls returned the smiles themselves. Although it was easy for them to tell that Naruto was forcing herself to smile. A soft cough brought their attention to the stairway beside the desks, and Naruto grinned up at Iruka as he smiled down at them, holding a clipboard under one arm. Heya, Iruka-sensei. What's up? Well, I overheard what you were saying about the Uzumaki clan. But are you sure you girls have never heard of them? At their simultaneous nods, Iruka let out a soft sigh. I'll have to speak with Hokage-sama about this. He thought, though outwardly he smiled. Well, the Uzumaki clan were actually Konoha's largest allies during the war. We were very close to them, due to the Shodai Hokage marrying the Mito Uzumaki, who was the head of the clan at the time. Naruto's eyes sparkled at the story, which was surprising a bit to Iruka since she usually didn't pay attention to his history lessons. Really? They were that close to Konoha? Iruka smiled, nodding his head. Indeed, in fact. He turned slightly, showing off the red spiral on the shoulder of his outfit. This spiral was the Uzumaki symbol, and it's placed on many things that mark it as an Uzumaki. All vests, several doors, and a lot of buildings have these symbols around the village in order to honor the relationship we had with the Uzumaki clan. They designed a lot of our seals, too, including the explosive tags many use today. Naruto smiled brightly at the news, but Sakura frowned, sharing a glance with the frowning Hinata. But, Sakura started, rubbing her chin slightly, if they're so important, why is this the first I've heard of them? Iruka sighed softly. I'm afraid I don't know the answer of that. My subjects were all about the period before the villages were founded. So I never was given the choice to go over the Uzumaki, since they were relatively minor until then. I'll definitely talk to the Hokage about this, though. It seems someone isn't doing their job right. Sakura nodded slightly, while Naruto looked away slightly. She knew it was probably because of her that the clan was being forgotten. Someone probably started to cut out the Uzumaki section of the lessons because of her last name, and nothing but. Iruka smiled, patting Naruto's head suddenly as he saw her depressed look. Don't worry, Naruto. If you'd like, I can tell you all about the Uzumaki clan later, okay? Her face lit up in a smile which Iruka mirrored, pulling his hand back. Anyways, we've got the team assignments ready. So sit in your chair, the right way please, and get ready. The blonde stuck her tongue out, settling into the chair beside Hinata as Iruka walked back down, turning to face the class with a wide smile on his face. Well class, this may be the last time I see you behind these desks. Ino turned towards Sakura, mouthing maybe, to her, earning just a slight shrug in return. Iruka smiled a bit, noticing the exchange, and looked down at his clipboard. You've all done very well, and I'm proud to have had you as my students. There were several smiles at this, but Ami, one of the more notorious civilian students, held her hand up. At Iruka's nod, the purple-haired girl suddenly pointed at Naruto, frowning. Why is she here, sensei? She failed the exam. She's not a kunoichi. Iruka sighed slightly as Naruto shot up, pointing dramatically at the girl. I passed with flying colors, Ami team. And as my first job as a kunoichi of Konoha, is to point out your wig. The blonde shouted, causing Ami's face to light up in a red blush as everyone's eyes turned towards her. W. Wig? I don't know what you're talking about. The girl stuttered out, taking a step back. This, of course, caused her to squeak as she fell back onto her chair, which caused her wig to slip slightly to the left on her head, revealing the blonde hair underneath. The class, minus a few select people, burst into laughter while Naruto smiled knowingly. Oh, Ami-chan. If you wanted to have hair like mine. She ran her fingers through her hair for effect, pausing as she smiled at the girl who glared at her in irritation. You just had to ask, no need to be embarrassed. It's not that, you blonde bimbo. Ami snapped back, glaring and fixing her wig with a heavy blush on her face. It's some stupid prank of yours, I'm sure. It was fine until I took a shower. The last part was muttered under her breath as Iruka clapped his hands twice to try and get the attention back on him. Alright, that's enough. You can't act like you're in the academy anymore, girls. You're going to be ninjas starting today. The Chunin sighed as Ami continued to glare at Naruto, and he shook his head slightly. But Naruto here did pass the test, you don't have to worry about that. Ami let out a soft huff, settling down in her chair and sending another glare Naruto's way, to which the blonde just grinned at. Iruka cleared his throat and looked down at his clipboard. Alright, Team 1 is, 2 days ago, during Naruto's shopping trip, Sarutobi Hiruzen, otherwise known as the third Hokage or Sandaime, smiled to himself as he settled into a large plush chair reserved for him only, located behind his desk in the Hokage's chamber, thinking over events that had taken place just the day before. Mizuki had forced Naruto to steal the Forbidden Scroll of Seals, and yet, it was key in allowing Naruto to pass her test. While he could have easily pulled some strings to get her to pass anyways, it would have caused an uproar for him favoring the demon child. Such a thought wasn't completely untrue, since he did care for Naruto quite a bit, but he would treat any child in her circumstance the same way. It wasn't really her fault she could not create a normal bunshin either, as far as he could tell. But the number of students going up by one did throw a wrench into the teams that had already been being set up. That was probably for the best, from what Naruto had told me. Hiruzen admitted to himself, fiddling slightly with his pipe as he took it from its holder. The teams originally set up relied heavily on what the Jounin instructors wanted, but it seemed only Kurenai had any interaction with any of the students at all, and only one which she had practically adopted as her own due to the problems with the Hyuga family. Despite that, it seemed his own son, Asuma, wanted the Ino-Shikacho combination, Kurenai wanted a form of scouting and tracking team, and Kakashi just wanted Sasuke. Considering the skills of the upcoming genin, it left Kakashi with Naruto, Sakura, and Sasuke, while Kurenai had Hinata, Kiba, and Shino. This, after reading through their files, created some problems for the Hokage. Issues that he would discuss with them. Hokage-sama, Jounin, Kakashi, Asuma, Kurenai, and Anko have arrived. About now. Hiruzen smiled warmly at his secretary, who was peeking through his door into the office, nodding his head slightly. Thank you. Send them in. The 4 Jounin entered quickly into the room after that, each taking a specific spot. Kurenai stood in front of his desk, greeting him with a quick Hokage-sama, which he acknowledged with a nod. Asuma said nothing, but gave him a slight wave as he leaned against the wall near the large window. Kakashi merely pulled his usual orange book out and leaned against the wall beside the door. Anko, however, was far more unique as she slammed her hands on Sarutobi's desk, though the man only smiled as a few of his pens bounced on the wood. Damn it, old man. I told you I'm not training any more damn kids. The purple-haired Jounin was known for her tongue and seemingly her lack of respect, but to the Hokage himself, it was like a breath of fresh air. Only Anko and Naruto treated him casually anymore. Even his own child seemed to treat him differently after he put the hat on. Chuckling, the man smiled at the woman in a calming manner. Do not worry, Anko. You will be training some of the genin, but I have a feeling you'll like who I have in mind. Anko clicked her tongue in annoyance, standing up straight with a skeptical look about her. I doubt it. No genin has impressed me for a long time, even Tenchan was a bit. She waved her hand slightly. Oh? Hiruzen smiled knowingly, leaning back in his chair. Not even the one that sneaked through the ANBU base and colored all of their cloaks. The one that Ibiki yelled at you for? Everyone looked up at this as Hiruzen's smile widened at the amused look Kurenai and Asuma were giving her. Even Kakashi looked a tad amused, though it was difficult to tell with that mask on his face. Anko, however, was twitching and cracking her knuckles slowly. Oh? It was a genin, huh? Ibiki really rode my ass on that one. A feral grin began to spread across her face as her eyes flashed dangerously, causing Asuma to sweat drop slightly while Kurenai simply rolled her eyes, used to her friend's attitude. And you're saying I get to train that one? Hiruzen shrugged slightly. It's a possibility. Oh, but I do recall she referred to you as... He paused, rubbing his chin slowly for dramatic effect. I believe she said she distracted the secretary before she went in. A secretary? Anko snapped out, her eye twitching as she heard Asuma chuckle slightly. The man instantly went silent as a kunai buried itself beside his head, though he knew it was coming, and the purple-haired woman clicked her tongue in annoyance. I'm going to train that chick into the ground. Calling me a damn secretary. Well, you were one at the time. Kurenai pointed out, smiling slightly as Anko's glare turned on her. Shush it, or I'll punish you too, ma. Hokage-sama. All eyes turned to Kakashi as he stood up, still looking down at his book, even as he spoke. I'm assuming that means you plan on having Naruto on Anko's team. Hiruzen nodded slightly. Does that mean she'll be with civilians? Kakashi knew that the Hokage would not give him just Sasuke as he wanted, since it wouldn't teach him the value of teamwork, so he knew he'd have 2 other important genin to work with. The council wouldn't let the Uchiha be paired up with just civilians, after all. But Naruto? They'd jump at the chance to cripple the girl in any way. The problem was that Kurenai, Asuma, and Kakashi were all chosen to train the clan genin. There were only 7, but included Naruto as her status as an Uzumaki along with having the Kyuubi inside her, and it included Sakura because of her mother's high status in merchandise. Sakura's father had also been a powerful ninja, a rather famous jounin, but had been far too wounded during the Kyuubi attack. Those 2 things together put her higher on the list than most civilians. Surprisingly, Hiruzen shook his head, smiling. I'm afraid not, Kakashi-kun. Let me explain. The professor turned his gaze over to Kurenai and Anko, regarding the both for a moment. Anko, Kurenai. You 2 will be training a team together. Together. Anko shouted, visibly startled, and her surprised expression was mirrored on Kurenai's face. What for? I mean, Kurenai and I are friends, but... The word friends was said a bit quietly, as Anko, much like Naruto herself, was treated like a monster due to her training under the missing nin known as Orochimaru. She wasn't quite used to having friends, but the 2 had grown close after several missions together, after Kurenai was left alone from her team graduating. It definitely kept Anko's mind off the verbal and price abuse she was often given from almost everywhere but her favorite dango shop. But that was neither here nor there. I was getting to that. The Hokage sighed a bit, intertwining his fingers together with his elbows on his desk. Kurenai, you are a relatively new jounin. You have plenty of missions under your belt, but no high-ranking ones. You've worked more in a group than Anko has, however. He cleared his throat slightly, looking at Anko with a slight smile. Anko, you have more experience than Kurenai in regards to missions, but you have refused to have a genin team in the past, excluding Tenten. You're also a Tokubetsu Jounin, so you aren't officially allowed to have a team on your own. Anko nodded slightly, having trained Tenten from Team 9, under Mado Guy, while the other Jounin had to go off on a mission, leaving his students to their own devices. Tokubetsu were also not allowed to have more than one student, unless they themselves were under the orders of a fully fledged Jounin. Hiruzen smiled slightly, remembering how the brown-haired girl had stuck to her green-clad sensei like glue after he returned, but quickly shook the memories away. Clearing his throat slightly, he continued. Also, unlike Kakashi and Asuma, you both are a bit specialized in certain areas. Coincidentally, the areas you specialize in complement each other, and I wish to make a well-balanced team. A team that has good talent in Genjutsu. He nodded at Kurenai, and a talent in Taijutsu. He nodded at Anko, smiling a bit. The two women shared a glance, both of them wearing slight frowns on their faces as they considered the Hokage's words. Anko was known as the Snake Mistress and had a lot of Taijutsu techniques, mixed with her knowledge of poisons, animals, and several types of ninjutsu. Kurenai, on the other hand, was heavily specialized in Genjutsu and known for her talent in it, often called the Genjutsu Mistress by her peers. She still had decent Taijutsu and knew several ninjutsu, but not nearly the same amount as Anko. Mix the two together, and you almost had the ideal ninja right there. The two were also good friends, so they understood each other enough to know what the other was thinking. They went out quite a few missions together as well, while Kurenai was preparing for her Jounin exam. Because of this, they knew each other's abilities and limitations, so there was logic behind them training a team together. But, with all due respect, Hokage-sama, Kurenai began, turning her gaze away from her friend. I did request a scouting and tracking team and I am not certain. The red-eyed woman paused as her leader held up his hand, shaking his head slightly. I'm afraid I can't abide by any request that was made for a team. As they stared at him in confusion, Hiruzen intertwined his fingers once more. Kurenai, you will still be teaching Hinata, regardless of the rest. She needs your support. The woman nodded slightly, staring curiously at him. Sasuke will still go to Kakashi since he is the only man that can teach Sasuke how to use the Sharingan, should it awaken. Kakashi nodded, frowning slightly under his mask at the should part. There was always a chance, a low one, that Sasuke could never develop his Sharingan. He was sure that would drive the boy crazy. Not to mention the council was come down on Kakashi's ass faster than you could say Uchiha. However, Sarutobi continued, silently wishing he had lit his pipe before they arrived. I can't abide by the others, due to information given to me about their personalities. He cleared his throat once, preparing himself to repeat what Naruto had told him. According to my information, Sakura and Ino are both infatuated with the Uchiha. This could terribly cripple them, and would best be avoided. The Uchiha himself cares nothing for them or anyone else. He definitely lacks any form of teamwork, yet he gets along with Kiba Inuzuka to some degree. In contrast to that, Naruto hates Sasuke and would sooner quit than be on his team, I imagine. She also seems to have strong desire to have her friends, Ino, Sakura, and Hinata, train to get stronger together, but she has a strong relationship with almost all of the non-civilian genin, excluding Sasuke. He coughed once, leaning forward onto his desk as he stared right at his son, Asuma. The Ino-Shikacho combination is also not allowed to happen. Ino is a strong woman, much more aggressive than her father was, and would hate to deal with not only Shikamaru's attitude, but your own, Asuma. Me? The young man blinked, pointing at himself. Indeed. You are a bit lazy when it comes to training, and would just play shogi with Shikamaru until Ino screamed at you to assist her in training. Chuji would just follow along at his own pace and would not get too interested in training outside his clan. Hiruzen explained, staring at his son who blushed slightly as he scratched his cheek. That had, after all, been his plan. Of course his father would see right through him. So in all I have only one set of the teams I could think of that would work. With that, he pulled out a sheet of paper and slid it across his desk towards the Jounin. They all looked down at it once, with Kakashi being the first to speak. I don't disagree with my team. I suppose it can work. Asuma muttered to himself, pouting slightly, though only Hiruzen really recognized it. Kurenai and Anko shared a look, and both of them shrugged slightly as they stood up. No problems here, I guess. Anko sighed a bit, shaking her head. But really, me? A real sensei? Are you? Yes, I'm sure. Hiruzen affirmed with a smile, leaning back in his chair. In fact, I think Naruto could help you out a bit with your problem. Anko frowned a bit as Hiruzen's smile grew. She owns an apartment complex, completely under her name with no one currently living there but herself. Anko's eyes widened at that and she grinned a bit, rubbing her chin. Oh really? Maybe I won't be too hard on her then, until she signs the deal. Anko had, rather recently, left her apartment to live in the forest after her landlord had constantly demanded an increased rent. Hiruzen chuckled softly, nodding. Perhaps that's for the best. You all will meet your team in 2 days. Dismissed. With a small salute, or a nod in Kakashi's case, the Jounin left the present, at the academy.